And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Benched with Bubba, episode 616. Going to talk about some early top 200 2024 fantasy baseball hitter rankings. Going to talk a couple moves that have taken place in Slash recorded on Monday in the MLB hot stove world, and much, much more. It's always fun talking to friends from pitcherlist.com, having this gentleman come back on the show, as I've had him on it previously. Got to hang out with him in First Pitch, Arizona once again, which is always a treat and a delight. And you can all follow him on Twitter at if the Chew fits, CHU fits. Scott Chew, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic. The babies are sleeping, haven't woke up. It's like 2 hours now. They're just staying down.
You just jinxed the whole thing.
Oh yeah, but I've got headphones on. The wife doesn't, so I jinxed somebody, not necessarily me.
That's true. Yeah. There's the look.
Right over there.
Yeah, for the video people, you just saw where that was like, oops, that was out loud. That's my inside voice. But how we doing, my friend? What do you got going on these days besides typing out every possible hitter under the sun?
Oh my god, yeah, the 50-page novella that I wrote about that. Other than that, I actually I took the week off work as well. So like between work and all this, I got burned out. So I took the week off, having an awesome time doing nothing. Right? People keep saying like, oh, what are you doing for your day off? I'm like, nothing. It's the best. Yep. Like, oh, it's going to be a relaxing time. It's going to be whatever kind of time I want it to be. Yep. Right? Like probably relaxing, but hey, who knows?
We're shooting for relaxing. If we get somewhere close to that, we're in good shape. Yeah.
I mean, how relaxing can it really be? I got like 8-month-old twins over here. Like the relaxing is capped, right? It's like a hard cap on how relaxing it can be, but I'm taking all of it all the way up to the cap.
Yeah, and like the thing a lot of people probably don't care about for people that have, little ones and whatnot, even the rough days, there's always that little moment where you're like, okay, this is fine. This will work. Like they make it all worth it in the end. So it's like you can have like the longest, most stressful day in the world, and they do one little thing, and you're like, okay, we're good. Everything's good in the world.
They're good at timing it like right before bed too. Like right before bed, they'll like do something adorable. And you're like, all right, I'll do it again.
Right when they see you're about to lose every last inch of your being, and then they're just like, yeah, okay, we'll bring you back in. So yeah, good stuff there. I'm glad the little ones are sleeping and having fun. Hopefully they don't wake in the next hour or so, but if they do, tell them to join the show. It'll be okay. It's Benched with Bubba. We can have fun. It's a family event. But like I said, we're going to talk some recent news. A couple signs. I recorded Monday, got most things. We have a couple since then. We'll talk about your rolling charts that you tweet out a lot. They kind of coincide with PLV. You gave a presentation at FPAS, which I said before the show. If people obviously weren't listening, I unfortunately didn't get to see because I believe I was recording my show at the same time as that was going on. So that's the only thing about FPAS. We always joke about there's so much good stuff. You can't be everywhere at once. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the top 200 hitters Scott made, kind of the process, some names that stand out, so on and so forth. So we'll have some fun with this here. But let's start with the recent news, and some are bigger than others, but we'll start with Ronnie Mauricio, big-time prospect. He came up towards the end of last year for the New York Mets, tore his ACL, playing some winter ball, obviously out for the season. That's a bummer, but that opens the door for, there's already going to be Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos potential. Now it's Beatty, Vientos. Do you have any take on December 13th of how you see this shaking out?
No.
Yeah,
I don't. I mean, really, the big takeaway is the player we cared about was Mauricio, right? Like that's the one 100%. We wanted to see him get the full-time job. We wanted to see him use some of that power speed combo, and now we won't, right? Like he's going to miss a decent chunk of the season. Who knows how conservatively they'll bring him up? We don't know how competitive the Mets are going to be, but I mean, it's not like they're looking as competitive as they were a year ago, right? Like when they had made all those signings. So I mean, it's just sad right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. A team that spent like almost $1 billion, it feels like, now they're kind of bargain basement hunting. It's trading guys off. Alonso's on the trading block. It's crazy there, but you're right. The Mauricio thing, that was the one we all wanted, at least fantasy world wise, that we wanted. Vientos looked like he'd be the DH at the time. Now he might get third base eligibility instead of util only. I think it'll be a platoon lefty righty situation for the most part with Beatty and Vientos. Obviously more to monitor, but that'd be my 2 cents. If anything, the glimmer of hope is Vientos gets third base eligibility at some point this season, and that's what you got to go off of. Big time power bat, but I think it's a platoon. Former Met, former Padre, now Kansas City Royal, Seth Lugo gets a nice little deal, 3 years, 45 mil with an opt-out after year 2. We don't care about that for fantasy, of course, but he goes to the Royals, a nice pitching ballpark. Lugo had a really strong season last year. I was kind of interested about him in drafts already, but him landing in Kansas City, does that do anything to excite you more, less, kind of the same on Seth Lugo?
I mean, I like it for ratio purposes. It's not as though they can't develop pitching, right? They had Cole
Yep.
Reagans, like they figured something out for somebody. This was actually the first time we saw Seth Lugo in the majors pitch more than 101 innings, right?
Mhm.
So I'm a little interested to see how that goes. It's not like he's young; he's not a spring chicken. The guy's going to be 34 this season. But it's not exciting, right? Because like how does he get to 8 wins again? Right.
Yeah.
He went 8-7 with the Padres. How does he get to 8 wins again? So, like, yeah, if you're like in a quality start league or you don't care about wins specifically, then Kansas City is as good a place as any, I guess, because it is a very friendly ballpark. Certainly at least as friendly as the one he just left, but it's not as though he's going to get a ton of run support.
Yeah, the run support's gonna be a massive problem. 100% on board with you there. As Nick is in the chat saying that your check is catched. You mentioned Reagan's on the show in the first 5 minutes, so you're good there. That's pitcher list approved. But the thing I like about Lugo, I guess, in this scenario is I agree 100% the inning situation, because you take that kind of jump, there are concerns there. But what I will say, the Royals are such a young staff, and him being almost 30, over like almost 35, 34, 35, they have no excuse not to just use him for as many innings as he can possibly throw. Like, they need him to fill innings, and that's the only upside. ADP is like 280. He's going next to Michael Wacha. So Lugo's got the strikeout upside there. So that's kind of intriguing, but I'm with you. You see pitchers make that jump no matter the age, and you get kind of like, how's this next year going to go on that arm? But we'll see how that goes. The big one in my neck of the woods, and if if you're a Giants fan, you've seen every positive and negative thought on the Jung-Hoo Lee signing with the San Francisco Giants, KBO MVP in the past. He's like 24, 25, super young center fielder. Any thoughts on this one? Because I've seen comparisons to the next great thing to he's going to be an average, like you better hope you're getting a slap hitter type guy.
Yeah. So the KBO is interesting that we see pitchers go to the KBO a lot. We don't see tons of hitters come back from there. I mean, I think the most recent one that people bring up is Kim over in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting about that league is it's so contact oriented, right? Like there is not a lot of strikeout pitching there. It's a lot of guys who throw softer, who throw a lot of breaking stuff. So on one hand, I do think he can come right over and have a really impact hit tool, right? I like Lee a lot in points leagues because he's going to make a boatload of contact. He's going to take walks. I think that part comes over and it plays. The real question with Lee, this is not unique to me. I'm not the only one who said this, but it's going to be how he deals with the upper heat. You just don't see it in the KBO. The KBO does not bring a lot of 95, 96, much less 99, 100, right? It's just not over there. So how he deals with that, especially like some of that stuff up, that I think is going to be the key to Lee and whether or not he can really be something more than a like Jeff McNeil type who slaps the ball, puts in play, could hit double-digit home runs, right? Like might steal 6 to 10 bases, but like that's to right now, unless we see some power that we never saw, or he instantly adapts that fastball speed, like that's the upside play. I think you're hoping for like a Jeff McNeil type with better stats because the Giants do some better stuff around him.
Yeah, it's the comp McNeil, Stephen Kwan, those types. You're hearing a lot of those comps where the hit tool should be very, very good. OBP skills are great. That's why I love the points league call. That's like a really, really strong. Like he should get elevated tremendously because he'll be at the top of the Giants order. He's going to get on base a ton. The Giants aren't great, obviously, but he'll still score a good amount of runs up top there, and that'll help a lot as well. It's the power that's the big question mark, especially in that ballpark, right? Center field, triples alley. That's going to be dreadful. So he has to pull the ball to have any success, like hard pull to have any success in that ballpark. And then you mentioned the velocity thing, and that's the big thing I've been reading the last few days is like the KBO's average or velocity is like 91. And baseball is like MLB's average is like 94, 95. And you mentioned there's also the guys that obviously throw heat, like Cheddar. And that's going to be his biggest bugaboo. I believe it was Chris Clegg tweeted out some information about the few guys that did throw in the high 90s or mid to high 90s in Korea that Lee faced. Was like if it was 93 plus, he only hit like 260 or two something, and 94 plus was like you got to 270, but still wasn't great compared to the 300 plus hitter they were seeing because everything's so slow. And his contact rates are great, like you said, but again, the velocity. So I'm torn as a Giants fan. I'm glad they did something. Like it's because it's just been so difficult watching them strike out on every possible free agent the last couple of years. And I'm optimistic he can play center field pretty well. He can get on base and set the tables. But when it comes to fantasy, my optimism has been dwindling a little bit more compared to what it was ahead of time, kind of reading, listening to what you said and other people, where it's like, yeah, it might be a little bit. Then again, he's still super young. Maybe he bulks up a little. Maybe he works on the launch angle. 2 of his 7 seasons in the minors, because he went straight from high school, to KBO, went straight to the bigs out of high school. 2 of his 7 seasons, he did have double-digit homers. So it's there. It's just a matter of the consistency factor. So similar to Jeff McNeil. He had that one monster year, and then it's like, where'd the rest of it go?
Well, I mean, that was also in 2019. So like we sort of know where it went. True. But yeah, I will just say, I don't like comping him to Ha-Seong Kim because I don't think they're that similar as players. No. I will say Kim did not hit fastballs very well in his first season. It was the exact same issue. His expected WOBA against them was like a little over 275 last I looked. It wasn't great. So that could be a first year adjustment. And again, we don't know how fast that will happen. We just know it's the thing to watch because that really unlocks his success longer term, right? Once he will figure it out, I think. You don't have that good of a hit tool and just never hit heat, right? But it does take time to adjust to it. I mean, the cage does not do the same thing. He's going to need spring training. He's going to need, especially early in the season, we're going to have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and the Kim comps, the way you said it, I like a lot. Because the way I like to comp him to Kim is it's like, okay, year 1, it might be a struggle. Like that's a reality of the situation. But by year 2 into year 3, I think we will see a very good professional hitter. And I just don't know if it's like the power, like you mentioned, Kim. You can see in Kim's swing, there is an uppercut in that swing. Like he has the power to do it. He's a righty, all that good stuff. Where I don't know if Lee quite has that, but we'll see. Time will tell. But the hit tool, like this year, I'm waiting for the struggles to come, and everybody's saying it was a horrible signing. But maybe in 25 or 26, we're like, okay, that's not as bad as we thought. We'll wait and see. And the last piece of news we have here: Rowdy Tellez, after basically a lost 2023 season, signs with the Pittsburgh Pirates. We've seen this before. Carlos Santana did this and was like sneakily good before he went to Milwaukee. Like I'm not talking fantasy world buster here, but we could see Rowdy play close to 100 games for Pittsburgh. And any fantasy relevance for you there?
He's gonna play, right? Like a lot of teams. I mean, there's a reason guys like this go to Pittsburgh, and it's to play, right? It's not like Pittsburgh's got some like first base prospect that's going to come up. Like, how much do you think they really want to platoon him with Connor Joe?
Exactly.
Right. Like, I mean, they want to see Rowdy Tellez hit either because they think he can be part of their team when they're competitive, which I mean, he's 28, so he's not young enough for their competitive window probably in Pittsburgh. But we know that you go to Pittsburgh because you can play, and they could trade him. Right? Like who knows how much they get, whatever. But Tellez, he had that one great year. It was 2022 and he played the full season. Right now, most teams will find that Tellez is too exposed against left-handed pitching to play every day. He doesn't help you on those days. So they platoon him. The Pirates don't care, right? Like they're just not that interested in whether Tellez is great against lefties because they don't really have anyone else to play there. So you might as well let him. You might as well see if he can hit a bunch of home runs and be a lefty in your lineup and just kind of go with it. So it's a great landing spot for him for fantasy because it makes him much more viable because he will play every day. Again, even in fantasy, he's probably best platooned, but deeper leagues, 15-team leagues, things like that, he's going to play enough. And in OBP leagues, I mean, his OBP was not great because his batting average was so bad, but maybe it doesn't hurt quite as bad as the batting average. Either way, he's got a shot to be a meaningful corner infielder. I'm not talking first baseman. It'd be a good corner infield in deep leagues.
In deep leagues, a good corner infield. I'd love him in draft and hold formats right now if you're taking deeper leagues because you can literally put him in for the weeks where he faces a lot of righties or something and enjoy that. There is definitely a pathway to some fantasy goodness if you can stream it properly. And I think there's a lot to like there with Rowdy Tellez. And I'm rooting for him. I always love Rowdy. I like the big boys that get their shots. And Rowdy's just fun. Like he smiles. He enjoys baseball. So let's have a little fun out there. All right. let's talk about some rolling charts, and it kind of interlines with PLV and all the stuff going on at Pitcher List. But the thing with Chew, besides Scott Chew, besides a lot of his just great information and his wonderful style that he brings to the table, is he tweets out a lot of really cool charts, and he obviously puts them in his articles and stuff too. But it always catches my eyes because I was telling him before the show is his charts are easy for me to understand because caveman over here, I can understand the X and a Y axis and see how things go up and down. We're good, and rolling charts are becoming more and more popular. So I kind of wanted to pick Scott's brain on this and how he utilizes rolling charts. Now he utilizes it with PLV or Fangraphs or whatever he's using at the time. Probably PLV, company man. But there are options here. So let's just start at the top, Scott. Like, what are you looking for rolling charts? Like, what brings you to look at a player per se to get going on rolling charts?
Yeah, so I think the best way to start that conversation is the place we're going to go, right? I mean, I just wrote this huge article about year-long stats and stuff like that. The problem with year-long stats, especially things like rates, like batting averages or strikeout rates or things like that, is they don't tell you the story, right? I mean, one of the reasons I like the rolling chart is because let's say a guy hit 250, right? And you could even look at the splits and say, oh, what did the splits look like up and down, whatever. But the rolling charts really tell you the journey. Like, how did they get there? Was it, I mean, a great example would be like Alejandro Kirk in 2022, right? When you look at his end season slug, it's really good. And it all comes from like a month and a half of action. Right. Or even Bo Bichette last season, right? Like his stats or Trey Turner, so much of it comes from one big spike. Like that is a story, right? It's more than just the monthly splits because months are arbitrary endpoints, right? They're just months come and go. Like players don't change because it's June 1st now, right? But they do change throughout the season. Every player changes constantly. I talk about it in the presentation. I'm going to do probably something like that presentation again when we do PitchCon, but
it'd be great.
The biggest thing is players change constantly throughout the season, right? Like they're just not static numbers. Even back when Chris Davis was hitting 247 every single day, right? He wasn't hitting 247 every single day. It came with ups and downs, and understanding those ups and downs, especially with young players, can help you understand what to expect in the future. You can't just go year stat. This is what I think it's going to, this is what I think is going to happen. That works for players that have been in the league 5, 10, 15 years. It doesn't work like in season, right? So in season, we want to know, are players doing something better? Are they doing something worse? And we can't just do that with like, well, what are his last 15 days, right? What's the last 30 days? No. Show me something that has samples baked into it, right? Each plot on the graph is a certain number of plate appearances or games or something like that. Show me that, see the ups and downs. Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? What does that look like?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And that kind of, in a roundabout way, it's what I like. Even when I do like my DFS or I'm looking for streaming hitters for my fab articles or things like that, I might be doing the 15 to 30 day samples, but in the roundabout way, it's like if I'm in July and I look at the whole season before that as a whole, like you said, that doesn't tell the whole story because he could have had a bad April. A lot of guys have bad Aprils, and you look at the end of the season, it's different. So I guess trying to see the peaks and the valleys, and maybe when you see a peak or a valley, well, what caused that? Is it the swing and strike? Is it the O contacts, O swing, all these different factors of the world? So let's go to the time frame part. I'm gonna hop around here on the outline because you kind of said like there's stories based on when you're looking. What kind of time frame are you looking at? Like I used to record with Toby all the time, Batflip Crazy, and he loved his rolling graphs on Fangraphs, and he would say it's like he'd do anywhere from 15 to 45 days. It all just depends on the stat, I guess. But what are you looking for in the time frames? If you want to interweave it into the stats you're looking at, that's totally fine too.
Yeah. So obviously it changes from stat to stat, right? Like certain stats are terrible with rolling charts because they like never stabilize, right? So like batting average is actually one that I just never look at. I don't care about your rolling regular batting average or like BABIP or something. It just doesn't to get a good sample of that. I need like 500 at bats at a time, right? Otherwise it's totally random. So I try to focus on stats that are a little more mobile. And when I say mobile, what I mean is like I get a meaningful sample for strikeout rate in like 50 plate appearances. There's like something valuable that you can learn from strikeout rate in 50 plate appearances. So that's roughly like 50, Fangraphs, they're rolling charts. They're awesome. You go to the graphs tab. and you just sort by game, or you just tell it, say by year or month, do it by game. It'll give you a rolling chart, and it starts at 15 days. That's roughly 50 plate appearances ish, maybe a little less because players, they have days off and stuff like that. But that 50 is really good for like strikeout rate, walk rate, things like that. After that, I could go into like every single little stabilization point, but I'm not a math guy like that. I can't tell you like all of those different values. What I will tell you is this: you can learn a lot just by looking at the chart itself. If you see a lot of like really erratic spikes and flat lines, that means your sample's too small, right? It's just
True.
not. It's just way too small. So
it's not rolling. It's not rolling now.
Yeah, it can be a little jagged, right? But if it's like really jagged and everything, it's just like up, down, flat line, up, down, flat. Like that's way too small. You'll know it's too big when it barely moves, right? Like players just aren't that stable. So play with the numbers until, I'm not just going to say like, oh, play with it until it means something, because it won't always mean something, but play with it until, generally, like for example, on PLV, we actually we start you out at a good point, right? We start you at a good number. And if you want to use different numbers, just base it on the total number of at bats or plate appearances or whatever that they had in the season, right? So a lot of ours on PLV are cool because they're skill metrics. They're not just stats. Their contact ability. We can talk about these more later, but they're really cool. But we start you out at a point, and sometimes I'll just start with, okay, cut that in half because I changed the sample from overall to just against left-handed pitching, right? So yes, I'm going to get a less meaningful number because I'm using a smaller sample, but also, it doesn't mean I can't get meaning from it. It just means it's a little less reliable, right? As long as the chart's still, it's still moving. It's not just like the flat lines or whatever. It's still valuable. I just have to also understand that the sample I'm using is smaller. So it could be random, or it could be less meaningful than the full thing. But I don't always have 200 plate appearances to wait to find out if a guy's changing, right? By that point, I mean, that's a third of the season. So you can use smaller ones. You just have to know that it's small.
That's a great point, because we're happy if a player gets 600 plate appearances in a season. So you got to kind of pick and choose your battles. And a lot of guys with platoons these days, like 450 is pretty strong. So where are you looking at that? And then the biggest thing, or we're talking about these young players we're going to talk about, well, your samples got real small. That could be like 2 months, 2 weeks. Like you're all over the board in that regard. So like you said, like I guess look at the graph and then kind of build your like philosophy or story around that and kind of like fine tune it from there is a really good point to look at it. Just for fun, and I'm guessing I know the answer here, but I want to hear it from you. How do you pick the player you're looking for? Is it just based on the content you're writing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's a huge part of it. But it's also, so it's also just about, I don't start with rolling charts, right? Because a rolling chart is a very specific narrative piece, right? Like the biggest thing rolling charts do is help you understand narrative. They help you understand why, how did something happen? What did it look like? It can't always tell you the why, but it can give you a lot of information about what actually happened from day to day. But that's not where you start with these stories, right? You start with, Trey Turner was a good example. I'm like, man, he stinks, right? Like first half of the season, even longer than that. It's like, wow, he's not doing well. When I see like on the player page, something's happening that's very different or unexpected, that's when I really start jumping into a rolling chart. So when I see a player's strikeout rate is down, right, I'll say, okay, show me the rolling chart and let me look at last season too, right? Like, what is this, like part of a trend? Is this something brand new? The example I used at First Pitch Arizona, that unfortunately I had to have on the board like the whole time because the internet stopped working the way I wanted it to, was Jake Berger. So Jake Berger had
a good one though.
So when you look, so the common narrative that was happening, and it may still be happening, is people said, oh, look, he goes to Miami, the strikeout rate comes way down, right? You say, look at the Chicago strikeout rate versus the Miami strikeout rate. It's a huge difference. And the rolling chart told me that that's the wrong narrative. Right. And the reason it's the wrong narrative is because the strikeout rate was the rolling strikeout rate was already plummeting. It was already coming down. Miami just noticed it. Right. It didn't change. Like the path, the trajectory didn't change after he goes to Miami. It's just like a random point on that little dot, because going to Miami was random for this. They didn't change him. They noticed he already was changing is more likely. Right. They already noticed that, dude, this guy has figured something out with his strikeout rate. He has figured out how to prevent that third strike. That's why they wanted him, not because they saw something they could tweak. It's probably because they saw a player who had changed and who is now much more valuable than the stats had shown before. And that's something you can do as a fantasy manager too, right? Like, you're not waiting for some random event for people to attach that narrative to. Easy narrative to make. Oh, Miami, they had a really good front office. Like, they're figuring things out, but they went and found a guy who already did that. Right. I mean, just like Nick mentioned in the chat, the Royals had nothing to do with Reagans. I assumed it was the Royals because
we all
of a sudden shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're watching these, you can find out that's the wrong narrative just by watching these players develop. Right. So rolling charts give you a very visual representation of that development. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it gives you that visual representation to help you understand that's why it's happening. Like Christopher Morel, super erratic player. We have a really great stat at Pitcher List. I'm a company man. It's called decision value. And it's not about the outcome of the swing or the take. It's all about the player chose to swing or not swing. Was that, and based on the pitch location, the count, the pitch type, the speed, the everything, right? The spin rate, what happened before, what the pitches were before, all those things. Was that, does our model think that was the right decision or the wrong decision? Forgetting about what actually happens afterwards, right? Like, if they did swing, we could call it a bad decision, even though they hit it out of the park, right? Because most players shouldn't do that. Right. We might say most players should not swing at this. The outcomes are usually very bad. With Christopher Morel, his decision-making is wildly inconsistent, right? He makes really good decisions and then he goes to start making really bad decisions. And a lot of it is because he becomes more aggressive at times. And, then he stops being so aggressive. It's really erratic. And until he's able to find ways to stabilize that, it's unlikely that he'll ever be consistent, right? Because baseball is a mental game. And when you're not consistently making good decisions, it's going to be really hard to be successful unless you have some kind of tool that's, out of this world lets you do that, right? He's not exactly a hit tool player, but he is someone that will swing and miss a lot. So when he's not making good decisions, it's hard. Knowing that part of the narrative, that his decision value is really erratic, it's not as though he just needs to make a little tweak, right? Now, decision value is something players can improve. Right. In fact, it's one of the easier things that they can improve because it's all mental.
Yes. 100%.
Right. It's much harder to be someone who hits the ball harder. It is hard to become someone who makes better, like who makes more contact. Right. But it is very possible to say, I'm not going to swing at that anymore. This is actually something Elly De La Cruz did. Like, he actually got better. I was going
to bring that up. That was one of your rolling graphs that stood out in a big way.
I mean, that's something he got better at. Is he great at it? No, not necessarily, but it's something he can get better at.
Well, someone with his talent, just a small improvement can be tremendous in the overall success of a player.
You don't need Elly De La Cruz to be Joey Votto. That's just not what you need him to be. Someone with, like, you don't want him to be, right? With that kind of power, with that kind of speed, you want that boy swinging the bat. You want him you want that. I mean, I should call boy. He's a grown man. He's huge, right? He should be swinging the bat every chance he gets if he thinks he can hit it. And actually, that was another cool thing that our skill metrics showed me, is that Elly De La Cruz is excellent at making contact. The reason we think he's bad at contact is because he swings at things that nobody should ever swing at. But when he does swing, he is way more likely to make contact than another player against everything, right? Like, those pitches, like down in the dirt, he actually will connect with them. It just often leads to weak ground balls. That's why it's a bad decision to do that. But he does make contact and he's really good at it. It's just, he shouldn't, right? He should let that go because the take is always better than the swing on those particular pitches. But like, that's the amazing thing. And seeing him grow there, even though the stats never really panned out yet because we didn't have a big sample, he was still struggling with this a bit, but seeing the growth in that direction, if I notice it, the Reds noticed.
Yes.
Right. I'm not smarter than the Reds. If I noticed, they noticed. He's going to, like, they're going to keep working on this with him. I think he can very much take the next step. I don't know when, but I see the pattern there. It is something that he can do. Whether or not he will, totally different story. But at least I know the trajectory is there, the ability is there, and the mental part was really getting there as the season went on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I pulled up his page while you were talking there, and like on the season, an 84% zone contact. I'm on Fangraphs, but only a 45% swing rate. He's like, so like, and he had like an 18% called strike rate to go with his 30% CSW. He only had a 12% swinging strike. Like, that's really all things considered when people think he's just like, it's crazy, I'm going to swing at everything. Like, it goes to your story. He's making contact on most things he swings at. It's just a matter of, even if it's in or out of the zone, it's just a matter of, like you said, the decision part of it is how does that come to be? And that'll come with time. He is very, very young. So that is a beautiful situation for him to be with. But like when you're looking at this decision value, and I'm going to kind of, you mentioned it, so I'm going to ask some questions on this one because I know you've done some work with that as well. Have you found, is it strictly you just look at the rolling charts decision value? Have you guys found like another way to utilize the concept of decision value to kind of track players a little differently, or is it all strictly on the rolling graphs?
Yeah, so the rolling graphs are the most interesting way to do it. Now we do, Kyle did an awesome job. He made these. Actually, the first thing you see when you pull up our PLV stuff, which is free until February, pull it up, and you actually see that he put it on like a scouts grade, right? Like 20 to 80 scale, and you can see like season long. How did this grade out? Decision value is really cool, but I'm glad you brought it up because there's one thing I want to talk about with decision value. That decision value is all about, whether it was a good decision for a normal player.
Bingo.
Not for that player specifically, right? So, like decision values, it always defaults when you pull it up to Juan Soto and decision value, right? Decision value.
I'm guessing his decision value is pretty good. Just
all
guessing.
the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Like his worst decision-making moments throughout the season are roughly 90th percentile in the league. It's actually my favorite part about these graphs that other graphs don't do. The StatCast ones, if you go to their page, they'll show you like MLB average. Fangraphs will tell you the player's average, like at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Ours tell you percentile for the league for that stat in that situation, right?
Okay.
So if you pull it up for like, you can break it down by pitch type, like we do 3 major pitch type, like fastball, breaking ball, off speed. Like if you pull up Juan Soto versus lefties fastball, those percentile numbers will show you 90th, 75th, average, and then we'll show you 25th and 10th, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you all that. Those numbers are dynamic based on the parameters you put in, right? So we're going to show you when it says this is 90th percentile decision value, it means against lefties throwing fastballs, right? So it's a really cool stat. But again, not every player is Juan Soto. Not every player should be Juan Soto, right? So I used Elly De La Cruz as one example. Another is Michael Harris. So Michael Harris is a guy who swings a lot more, right? Some players are just more aggressive. He swings a lot more. He gets away with making average decisions, sometimes worse, because he's really good at making contact, right? He's really good at getting the bat to the ball. Luis Arias, actually, he's got amazing plate discipline, but it's not because he's a good decision maker. That plate discipline all comes from, I can hit anything, right? Like he doesn't care because Luis Arias is not trying to hit the ball 400 feet. Like ever, because he never does.
I'd love to see Tony Gwynn. I'd love to see Tony Gwynn's because he was the same way. I just want to get base hits basically and see where it goes.
And I can, I didn't invent that. I'll tell you, Tony Gwynn's was probably terrible. Our model would tell us that he has terrible decision value and that we also don't care because his contact ability was through the roof, right? He doesn't need to make a good decision on that fastball 2 inches above the zone. Because if he wants to hit a single with it, he will. I mean, that's what Luis Arias does. Luis Arias sees pitch and says, can I hit a single with that? And then if yes, he swings, which, like for a lot of players, that's not a great decision, right? Because they're not that good at putting the bat on the ball. They're not trying to just go up there and hit singles. But for players that do, that break those molds, that's totally fine. It's absolutely fine for them, for a guy like Luis Arias to make bad decisions, or Elly De La Cruz or Neil Cruz, right? Both those guys, they don't need to be amazing decision makers. They need to be average decision makers to be elite players.
There's a couple things there that'd be fun to look into some more. Is like, are there buckets of batting average guys without power, like in Arias? Are we just like slapping it around and the decisions are bad? Or are there guys with like 40 plus home run power, maybe like a Schwarber or a Soler, but their averages stink, but they're like super, like we don't swing unless it's our pitch, we're going to crush situation. Those would be fun dynamics. And to your other point, like you mentioned with Elly De La Cruz and these other guys, like they don't have to be super disciplined or super great at decision making. And we've noticed that in recent years with guys like, from like one season to the next, you see the power decline and this and that. Then you go look at their swing rates, you look at all these things, like they got super like cautious at the plate. Like they just started taking more pitches. And next thing you know, it's like a 2-strike count, and now they're swinging at stuff they can't really get hits on because they don't want to strike out. So there's like a whole different deal about that. So that's why it's interesting, like you said, is the decision value is a metric, but it's not like everyone has to be phenomenal at the decision, because it's kind of what outcome are you looking for. And I know PLV bases on if is it should have been a good outcome, not a good outcome, and those kind of things. Like that's part of the cha-cha, but that's very interesting. The decision value, I remember seeing that last year and kind of poking around at it, and there's a lot I'm still trying to learn with that one, but it's quite an enticing tool if you want to, I guess, see where they're flourishing and if they should or shouldn't be, I guess, maybe something like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Schwarber is actually a very good decision maker. He did have a period this season where he was not making great decisions. Yep. I haven't lined it up timing wise. It was either when he was really hot or really cold, right? He was either cold because he was making bad decisions, or he was making bad decisions because he was really hot and was just sending everything out of the park, right? Yep. I mean, that's just like, that's Kyle Schwarber, but he makes amazing decisions because that's what he does. He's a patient guy. And again, it's just so important to like, just remember that players can succeed with different skill sets,
100%.
Right? Like they absolutely can. And they can be really good at certain things. Like you could talk about like Davis Schneider, who has amazing power and amazing decision value, right? He made really good decisions. He had really great power. His problem, he's terrible at making contact. You can make the right decision every time, but if you swing the bat and don't connect, it doesn't matter how good your decision was, right? It's a huge thing that we see with a lot of, especially power hitters who, other guys like this might have been, DJ Stewart, another guy who's like pretty good at making decisions, good power, but terrible at making contact. It's going to be really hard to succeed that way. James Outman, another one, really, really good at making decisions, has plenty of power, and misses a lot. Aaron Judge is actually this way, but it's fine because every time he connects, it goes a million feet. So
yeah, it's 200 miles an hour off the bat. So it doesn't really matter what's going on there. Just don't be in the way of it. A couple questions. This could be maybe baked into the statistic and tool already, and I'm just totally overlooking it here. So you're mentioning the decision, the good, the bad decisions, and then you're mentioning it doesn't even matter if they're not that good at decisions because they're just making contact all the time. But is there a way to factor in? Okay, sure, they're making contact all the time, but the quality of contact's not good. Like, is there like a factor in that scenario of, okay, because that's one thing I looked at. Okay, Tyler O'Neill's my example. He's become more disciplined at the plate. I haven't even looked at the decision value. He could be horrible at it, but he was very much less aggressive. Each season's dropped down. He's hitting more ground balls because he's ending up swinging at pitches. He's making contact. Contact's fine, but he's making it on pitches like down and away, stuff where you're not gonna hit for a lot of power, stuff like that. Is that factored in, or is that just another thing to look at after you see the first few steps?
Yeah, so it's not a factor in the individual stat, but it's also why decision value on its own is not. It's not.
Oh, none of these stats are end all be all.
Yeah,
it's just another tool to dig in more. But that's why I was curious on that one.
Yeah. So actually, I'm glad I hadn't looked at this. I'm looking at Tyler O'Neill right now. You may be surprised to know that at the start of 2023, his decision making was very average. By the end of the season, he was in the top 5-10% of the league in making decisions, right? It basically goes up and just stays up. It's really interesting. It makes me actually slightly more interested in Tyler O'Neill than
I'm very interested. If he gets more aggressive on the inside part of the play, it could be comeback time.
And his power is consistently above average, right? So that's really good. Now I'm going to look at his contact. It improved. Starts in like the bottom 25th percentile, moves up to about the middle, right? And it's a funny, decision value and contactability are not at all actually connected, right? Like they measure two totally different things. One of them is a pitch level stat. The other is a swing level stat. Contactability is just when you swung, were you more or less likely to make contact based on the rest of the league, right? Yep. He starts out the season between like 4 to 6% less likely to make contact. That's pretty significant. So 6% would put you at about the bottom 25th percentile of the league, meaning when you swing, you're 6% less likely to make contact. MLB average, of course, it's 0. That one's always a flat 0. And that's where he gets up to towards the end of the season. So O'Neill gets better at making contact as the season goes on. I'm very interested now to see if it's connected to like any specific pitch type. I'm going to look at fastballs. He was not very good at connecting with those compared to the rest of the league. Breaking balls, Yeah, he didn't see that many of them. He didn't swing at that many. Just gotta adjust the sample here. But he was very average against breaking balls. So I mean, so that's a plus, but it was flat, right? He's kind of the same for the whole season. So interesting there that he gets better. Looks like it's just like sort of a little bit better against everything. But it's again, that's how this whole process for me works, right?
Yeah.
You talk to me about, someone mentioned something or I see something where I'm like, oh, Tyler O'Neill. What happened last year? Did he seem to get better as the season went on? Right? Did he have a good second half, good month, or whatever? And I say, okay, where could that have come from? And now I can see. I mean, probably mostly decision value, right? Like he got a little better at contact, but the real thing is going from average to top, like among the best in the league decision making by the end of the season. And a guy with that kind of power, again, making really, really good decisions, only swinging when he should swing. You get better stats out of that, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a mathematician to figure that out, right? Like that's what 100%. I love about rolling charts too. You mentioned it earlier. I'm not a big math guy. I went to law school, not math school, but I do know that when these graphs, like for example, when the decision value graph like keeps going up when it's going to the right, that's really good.
Yes,
like that means
up is good.
Yeah, up is good, unless it's the strikeout rate chart, which is actually, we want
that to go down.
As far as like entry level charts, like if there's like if there's like a one that you want to break into, like that strikeout rate chart is really, really useful. It's easy to get to. We actually don't have it for PLV because we focus on the skills metrics, but both Fangraphs and Statcast will show you the strikeout rate. You can use a fairly small sample size with it at 50 plate appearances. And man, it tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about what's going on with the player. Like we talk all the time about like pressing. Was the player pressing? 100%. Right? How do we pull that out? Actually, that's where strikeout rate tells you a little bit. That back to PLV, decision value tells you a ton about pressing. Right? Because if you're swinging all the time when you shouldn't, especially compared to how you were before, that looks like pressing. Right? Like that, like it's really cool at picking out again some of these narratives. And that's where all of this comes in. Rolling charts, not super predictive this way. Like just because it's going up doesn't mean we'll keep going up, right? They roll because every player goes up and down. But if you need to project the next 50 plate appearances, yes, there are ways to do that using stats and all that. But like knowing the narrative to me is the most important thing, because if I understand, like if I have the way I frame it will very much change how I see it going forward, 100%. Right? Like understanding that, like, oh, hey, look, yeah, the strikeout rates, the strikeout rate is pretty stable, but oh, look, the zone contact is falling off, right? Yeah. Like that tells me something, right? Or if I see like decision value just keeps dropping, does that mean it's going to keep dropping? No. Does that mean I'm super thrilled at the moment? Also, no, right? Like that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. To just any edge I can get is helpful, right? We all can see the strikeout rate on the season, and we can all see it for like the last 15 days or last month, but seeing how that's gone all season, or I know I'm ranting a lot here, but to me also very, very importantly, when this is going to come up a lot in April, we're going to talk about why 100%. Is this guy hitting worse than ever, right? But what if it's not, right? Like it looks like it's the worst because by the end of the season, he's always got a 25% strikeout rate. Right now it's 35. Look up the rolling charts for the last 3 years. You might notice that this player hits this 35% strikeout rate over 50 or 100 plate appearances all the time, right? Because players go up and down. It's normal.
Baseball is a game of streaks. That's the way I always like to say it. It's a 6-month season. You could have a bunch of streaks in there. There could be 2 streaks. There could be 20 streaks. You don't know, but it's a up and down thing. And then just kind of to wrap up what you're saying, there's what I like is it kind of, like you said, it tells a story. It opens things up. It's like we talk about the Bloom boards with Bloomfield. It's like, this is just like, okay, this guy stands out. Now let me dig in some more. What's going on here? That's the whole premise of these things. That's why they're fun to talk about and kind of pinpoint thing. Like, Tyler O'Neill, he had a back issue a lot. He was not even wanting to swing at fastballs inside because you couldn't turn on him anymore. So, like, there's this whole different dynamic of things. Like, if he gets healthy, he keeps the good swing decisions on, so on and so forth. Because, like you mentioned, his fastballs, he wasn't that good on. Well, because he wasn't even wanting to swing at him. Like, he didn't want to. It was just his thing. Like, Matt Thompson, big time Cardinals fan from Prospects Live, he mentioned it all the time when I talk about him. It's like he does not go inside. Just little things like that, and then it kind of goes and coincides with, you said fastball not good. Well, it checks out. He just didn't want to swing at him, so it really is a thing there. the last thing I'll mention, and then we'll go to your top 200 hitters, and because I could talk to you about this forever, we could just keep spitballing things. I think it's a really good conversation. We might have to do some other time, or you have PitchCon probably coming up for it. But you mentioned Kyle Bland. I just want people to look. Kyle Bland is on Twitter at Blandalytics. He's a full-time pitcher list. Yeah, just throwing that out there. And just really, really good dude. We both got to meet him for the first time in Arizona, and he will be coming on the show in the future. We're just kind of ironing some more things out, but really good dude. So he's kind of the man, the myth, the legend behind PLV. So check all that good stuff out.
Oh yeah, he makes the sausage. I just eat it, right?
Yeah.
Like I
eat it too, so we're good.
Yeah. I consume the content. He's the one that makes it, and again, very, very cool stuff. Very great for narrative building. If you want to know like the nitty gritty of how these things work, like how they came to be, it's that go to him. I'm very good at, I can tell you about what it means and how they relate to each other. But when you want like, why does it prefer players taking pitches, right? Decision value, like always favors players who take pitches, right? The more passive, most often, the better, right? Because most pitches are hard to do anything with, right? Like most major league pitchers, are hard to make contact against. And the only reason I wanted to bring up pitchers just for a second, it's weird. Conceptually, fantasy baseball players are much better at understanding the concept of rolling charts when it comes to pitchers, right? Because it's not weird to them that certain pitchers will have a streak of 2 or 3 games where they strike out 10 guys, 3 games in a row and then go back to striking out 5, because sometimes, Nick Pivetta gets locked in every year for a little while and then disappears, right? And we don't think that it means he's a different guy. It's just what happens. Rolling charts help you understand that same concept for hitters, right? That sometimes they're like this. You can look back 2-3 years. You can see these low points, like Kyle Schwarber stinks for chunks of the year, every year. We just know this about him. Nothing's wrong with him during this time. It's just the nature of his game, right? Yep. That he has a weak spot and then he fixes it. That's what makes him a incredible major league player. So he fixes these weak spots and then has tears that no other player can match for, 50 games at a time, right? Rolling charts help you understand what these players do and how they do it and what it looks like, because it's amazing. I mean, you write a lot about fantasy baseball. I write a lot about fantasy baseball. It's amazing how many times people will come to you and say, what's wrong with this guy? Should I cut him? Is he done? Is he cooked? Right? Even though it's like a long-term major league player. And it's like, well, actually this happens every year, right? Like people ask me about this guy every year because it's just the nature of his game. Let the rolling charts tell you not just like what's going to happen, but what's happened in the past, what it looks like.
It's a great point. And that's something I need to utilize more of, because you're right. Especially in April and May every year, it's, should I cut this guy? Like they're just the end of the world for getting there's 4 to 5 more months of baseball to go. And these are, like you said, Schwarber, professional ball player, pretty good. Like there's some of these guys, and sure, they're not all going to figure it out, but more often than not, the back of the baseball card wins. Yeah, that's how I look at things.
For Paul DeYoung and Owen Miller every single year, right? Like every year they have like a good 15, 20-day stretch, and everyone says, should I add him? I'm like, yeah, if you want to cut them in a week and a half, fine. Yep, exactly. Right? Because like we see this every year. This is what happens. They're good for a short stretch, and then pitchers remember, oh yeah, just don't throw them strikes. Yes, and then they stop doing that, and the players stop being good, right? Like it's amazing. You can see these, like whenever you see a hot player, just go look at a rolling chart really quick and see if this is something that happens a lot. Like they get hot for a little. Yeah. Like these tropes happen all the time. They're real. Right. Like, and it's not because these players have now figured something out and then magically forget. It's just because some players, they're good enough to be major league ball players because they're good enough to do this for a short period of time. Yep. And then pitchers actually scout them and go, oh yeah, that's right. I can beat this guy.
There's a big hole we could attack, because that's why you're a quad A player. That's where we're at here. Yeah, 100% with you there. That's fun. Rolling graphs for the win. They keep getting more and more popular for a very good reason. So let's talk about top 200 hitters for 2024. I'm pretty sure we will not see Paul DeYoung and Owen Miller on them. So we got that going for us. There's kind of a couple things here. Like I finished up my preliminary rankings. I posted them all and done my thing with those. How did you go about ranking your players? It's December and you wrote 22,000 words. So you probably started it in November. Maybe not. Maybe you're crazy like that. But everyone's got a different way to make the sausage, as you mentioned earlier. So how do you go about kind of making your rankings in December?
Yeah, so it's the two main tools we have we have three main tools available to us right now to do that, right? We have historical stats, we have a few projections that might be out, and we have NFBC ADP data, right? Those tend to be my starting points. Like, basically the earlier you do it, the fewer of those tools you have available to you. I like to start with those three, not because like it makes the real like base point of, I pull up the ADP list and then I just start moving things around. Actually, what I find really valuable starting with ADP data is sometimes there's guys way higher than I ever would have thought to put them. And that tells me there might be something to look at here.
100%.
Right now, sometimes it's just a weird min pick, right? But sometimes it's like, man, everybody's really excited about Nolan Jones. And I know he was good in September, but why? Like, what happened? Back to rolling charts. I look at a couple of those. I look at some season long stats. I try to figure out what that is. And then I can come up with sort of a ranking for him. But ADP is a great starting point. Projections are the other. I like projections because I can't conceptually just hold like 400 hitters in my brain. I can't do that.
100%.
Projections do a great job though of giving you a starting point of like, okay, who looks like they might get some playing time, right? Or like players who may not be projected for much playing time. Like, what does Steamer think of some of these guys who haven't been to the majors at all yet, right? Like Steamer has spent time thinking about how to translate these minor league stats to major league stats, right? It gives me a viewpoint. Again, it's not somewhere where I'm like, okay, Steamer says he's better, so he's better, right? I mean, nobody really thinks that way. But what it does is say, oh man, Steamer really doesn't like this guy coming to the majors. Why are they so down on him? Right? Like what is it? What about his stats? What about this, maybe AAA track record doesn't pass muster? Like, why does they think he stinks? It gives me a starting point for looking at players, just like ADP does, right? It's just I need a starting point to say, what do I need to understand about this player? Because there's very few players where you can just say, well, it's probably going to be the same thing as last year. There are a chunk of those guys. But for the most part, it's like, okay, I need a starting point. I need some sort of narrative in my head about what this player could be. What weren't they? What were they? What could they be? And from there, you kind of like can just start putting down players, and you start out with this big list and then you just mess with it for like a week.
Yep. No, I'm with you.
As I'm so I had this great Excel spreadsheet that I was going to use to be like, okay. And then when I do my position ranks, it's already here. I lost track of it because I kept changing ranks while I'm writing, right? Because I'll be right. I'm writing up a blurb and I go, oh, let me go check this stat real quick. Make sure I say this right. And then all of a sudden I see something interesting, right? Like, oh, whoa, the walk rate really changed in the second half. Is that, let me look at a rolling chart or let me look at like some of this. Let me try to figure out why that happened. And again, then you have to start making your gut call. Because the one thing that really changes between rankings and projections is that projections is trying to tell you what's most likely to happen, right? But that's not really what rankings are, because the season isn't played out based on what is most likely to happen. Rankings have to try to account, but what could happen?
100%,
right?
Yeah.
This is the most likely, but what could? That's why like Elly De La Cruz will be taken earlier than his projection suggests, because it's not about the projection for Elly De La Cruz. It's about the ceiling, right?
Yeah.
And
you're drafting
floor.
Elly, you're drafting the ceiling. That's what you're going for.
And so much of ranking is just about, okay, projections deal with floor and ceiling one way, which is sort of average it out in a way, like not just the median, but like it figures out a point between those two. Whereas ranking is a little bit more organic for me, where I say, okay, what does ceiling and floor look like? And where am I in the rankings, right? Like there's this big chunk, like around like 100 to 150, where floor starts mattering a lot more to me, right? Fair. Like, because the ceilings are just so distant to get to, right? I'm not talking about like a 20% chance of getting to this. Now it's starting to look like a 10 or a 5% chance. Same ceiling, much, much more difficult path to get there, right? Like, I notice as I start going down, the reason a guy gets moved down is I'm like, how many barriers are there to get to that ceiling?
True.
He's got it, but what are the barriers? How many are there? Are they injury? Are they playing time? Are they actual skills? Are the skills just too erratic, like a Christopher Morel, right? Like Christopher Morel, a little bit of a playing time problem because he doesn't really play any position well defensively, right? But as far as like ceiling, huge tremendous power ceiling. He hit like 11 home runs in like 16 minutes or whatever it was, right? Like amazing ceiling. But man, the path to getting that ceiling is tough because he's got contact issues. He has these long slumps that are difficult for him to break out of. Like the more barriers there are. And so like I try to that's like that calculus, however you work that out in your head, that's kind of where your rankings for me end up. It's, how difficult is Ronald Acuna is number one because the floor is so high. Even like his floor is based on how many games he plays, right? Period. Because when he's on the field, he's amazing, right? It's just, that's how it works for him. And when the floor is that good and the ceiling is by far best fantasy player, right? Like by far, it's easy to rank him one. It gets more and more difficult as you go.
100%, and that's where it's like you said you did the ceiling to the floor. Where do you kind of land in that window? And I guess sometimes I even in my rankings I like make a bigger stance on a guy that I'm really concerned about getting to that stealing. But it's like I know he's really good, so he still has to be up on the list. I can't like just totally tank him on the rankings, but I will move him down far enough where people are like, "Why is he so low?" I'm like, "Well, here's why. I guess I think he's more of the closer to the floor than the ceiling type scenario." But that's why I think rankings are fun because there are rankings. Like it's how we visualize the situation playing out. If you just want, whatever rankings, just go use the ADP. Like just go print out the ADP. That's what you want. Go use that. Where our rankings, like the way you do it, I think writing helps a ton. Like you said, writing blurbs for each guy because it opens your eyes. Like right now, I just did my early rankings, and I'm just kind of going off of I got the stats up. I got similar to what you're doing. But I just kind of put the rankings in a spreadsheet. I move things around as I look at them some more and everything, and then I spit it out, and I'll do an updated thing later, and I'll put pen to paper on a lot of that. But initially, and that's what stinks is I'll start doing more stuff. And go, oh, man, I should change that ranking. Like that's wrong, but that's out there. We'll fix it later. It's December, but it is fun to kind of piece the puzzle together and the whole biases that might be in play, even though we don't want to admit they're in play type things and all that good stuff. How are you ranking the younger players though? That's the biggest conundrum I have in drafts because I'm a very boring, safe drafter, some would say. So getting like super aggressive on a young player is difficult for me. But some people will, like you said, Elly De La Cruz will go high. He'll go higher than probably anybody than I will ever take him in a draft. There'll be at least one guy in every draft that'll have him higher than me. But just all these other guys, Jackson Chourio, once he got the deal, his highest pick's now 124 in an FBC draft. Like he's skyrocketing up. How do you do those players?
Yeah. So unlike a lot of folks writing rankings right now, I don't focus on 15 team and FBC, right? So they're for pitcher lists. So I play by Nick's rules, and that's 12 team. And that changes a lot of things. So I think one 100%. Thing we talk about these rankings, I spent all this time in a 12 team league. Your rankings start changing at pick number 13. And that's because the vacuum is over. Yeah. Right. Like we do all this in a vacuum, but I actually write in number 14, Yordan Alvarez. I actually talk about how you might move him down on your board if you started with Judge or Tatis, right? Because they're both 100%. Big injury risks. Yep. So you might not want Yordan Alvarez, even if he's the next highest player on your board for your second pick, because like, man, I already am very wrapped up in outfield injury risk, and I might have to replace two of them before the season even starts, right? Sure. Like that's possible. So it already starts changing, but in a 12 team league, I get to lift some of them up based on ceilings because it's a 12 teamer. Almost none of these guys come out as like these young players that have very little MLB experience. Almost none of them come out as your first pick at any particular, like they're not your first round pick or your second round pick, except for maybe like Elly De La Cruz. So you get to lift them up a bit and say, look, the replacement level in shallower leagues is so much higher. You are not sunk if you lose one of those players, because there's good players that are going to come up on the wire more than once, right? Like they can't just be stashed all year, because in a 12 team league, you can barely bench any hitters in the first place, right? Like you got to have like all pitching. So I get to raise them in this particular format, 12 team standard leagues, which, it is an incredibly popular format. You get to lift them up because you get to take the risk. Now in a 15 team league, like I was in the tout 15 team auction, right? Mixed auction. They moved down my board a bit because I know I have to pay top dollar, and I'd rather take those risks on players who I know the floor a little bit more securely, right? Like Elly De La Cruz's floor is unfortunately really, really low, right? Like could get benched at times low. If he struggles that much, I don't think he will, but he could. Versus other guys where you can take other risks at around that same time, where the risk is like, I hope Adolis Garcia doesn't just like fall off with strikeout rate, right? True. like very different risks, because I know like I can make a much safer pick because like I know what Adolis Garcia or even Michael Harris, I have a much better idea of what that player, like what the ceiling and floor look like. So I'm more willing to spend that money because I'm more aware of the return. And in a deeper league that matters because like the waiver is trash.
Yeah.
Like it's so
like,
rare to find anything.
I was gonna say, like using the 12 team idea, you can be a little more willy nilly if you want. At the same time, like you said, if you start getting injury prone guys, maybe get a little safer at the next few rounds. But it's definitely like the 15. It's more of a floor play more often than not than a ceiling play because, like you said, that replacement value, don't wish it upon anybody. Just don't. It's just not fun. Not fun at all in that regard. I guess that's where in a 15 I get really nervous about taking younger players, let alone like your Adelises and stuff. Because younger players, like we all love them right now, but do we really know if they're going to play? How much they're going to play? Like there's a lot of question marks in there that make it very, very tricky. That they could be super talented. Still might be a couple years. Like we mentioned Jung-Hoo Lee earlier. Like the dude's going to be super talented, but is this the year to get aggressive on him? Probably not.
I think a really good example is, do we think Corbin Carroll is a different player he was coming into last year than we did this year?
That's a good question.
Not really, right?
No,
but we take him a whole lot earlier, right?
That's fair. I guess you're hoping for 50 plus stolen bases in the past. Like, yeah, your ceiling.
Before we just weren't as sure of the ceiling and floor, right?
Yeah.
And now we got to watch.
Yeah,
now we watched more of him and we have a better idea of what that ceiling and floor look like. So we can be like, okay, yep, for sure. I can take him. He's my number 4 hitter overall.
Yeah. That's
last season. We talked about how he could very well be a top 5 hitter going into 2024, but we couldn't make that call quite yet. Cause they're like, look, players struggle when they go to adjust. And he did have some struggles towards the latter half of the season, but we got to see so much of him. We got to see what like rough stretches for Corbin Carroll look like. We have a better idea of what those are too. That changes the calculus on everything. So that's like, to me, that's the hardest part with young players is that you're just taking such a risk. And I there's no problem taking risk. But you got to balance the types of risk you take, right? The injury prone rookie versus the performance prone rookie are two very different sets of calculus, right? Because like 100%. If I know the rookie's going to play most of the season, they're really, they're known for being quite durable. I can, take the risk to say, okay, I know the certain floor, but Royce Lewis, his issue is not talent, right? The talent floor is fantastic. The talent risk is minimal, but the playing time risk is devastating at times, right? Because he's missed so much time. So like, even you can get that granular if you want, just make sure you weigh those different kinds of risks too. Right. So if you've got, if even in a 15 team league, you might say, look, I feel real good about getting my third base, innings covered. Right. I think I'll be able to get them covered because I have targets later in the draft that'll get them covered. I just want to make sure I have elite level talent because my some of my earlier picks are all safe with lower upside. Then go make the upside play. Right. But like, it just, I hate saying it because like it makes it sound like my rankings don't matter, but they start changing instantly during the draft based on the types of risk you've taken and what you
100%,
can absorb.
100%. That's why it goes back to the decision value. Like these are all just like starting points to get your brain going to where you need to be able to go. That's why they say like learn the player pool so you can bob and weave because no draft is going to go straight down your rankings boards. But the rankings is supposed to basically give you an idea of where things go. Jenny Butler has wrote some great articles on like making flow charts. Okay, if I go here to here to here to here, this works. Or I can go here to like have bailout plans. Basically, like how do I react if the guy I wanted in round 3, well, he's gone. How do I adjust here, which is going to obviously adjust my 4th round pick because now I got this position instead of this position. So like you said, like the rankings go out the window at a point, but they're still there to kind of keep you in tune of, don't go crazy with certain things. When you're looking at stats potentially for your ranking, like you mentioned third base innings, that's technically a stat we don't talk about, but it's stat because you want playing time, which lead to more stats. Do you have a preferred stat you like to use to maybe be like a tiebreaker for your rankings? Because as you go down the draft board, obviously, and you go down your rankings, obviously, 5 category guys aren't there anymore. You get into the 4s, then into the 3s, and so on and so forth. So what's a stat you kind of like maybe prefer, or did you think was shallow so it kind of got a boost for you?
This ended up surprising me a lot because I thought I knew what the answer was going to be, and it ended up being power.
Yep.
So power was something that just kept coming up for me that like, yeah, but if he only hits 15 home runs, right? Like, unless it comes with a boatload of steals or an amazing average, like, how can I use that? Because when you don't, like, especially when you don't hit for a lot of power, you have very limited power. The other two stats get stuck with it, right? So if how are you going to score your runs or get your RBI, right? Like that, those two, like that's 3 of the 5 hitting stats, right? Like between home runs, RBI, and runs. And so power a lot of times became a thing that would really push guys up because, yeah, there's power all around, but you'd be amazed at how quickly you start running out of for sure 25 home run guys.
Oh yeah.
Right. And they're not, I mean, the wire, that is a tough game to play, right? Like you can technically stream any stat or any position. I find streaming power to be very difficult because the players with a bunch of it are already gone. Right. Like there's very few players have a ton of power that are just laying around on the wire unless they don't play. Right. And then you need to line it up based on like, oh, well, are they going to, is this lefty going to see a bunch of righties or something like that? So that was probably like the biggest thing I found later on. Earlier on, it was like balance, like power and speed balance. And you didn't really need the tiebreakers quite so much. But as you get later on and things are a lot more clustered together, I noticed that power got elevated more than anything else.
100%. I agree with that in a big way. That's why I kind of force even my earlier picks surrounding that and kind of adjust as we go on. But positional wise, is there a position that stood out to you? Because I have my theories on this, but I want to hear yours because early drafts, I get kind of not happy with a certain position as things go. What did you find with your rankings?
Yeah, so last season, I felt like it was all about third base, right? Like I can't tell you how many times I talk about last season, how everything has to be about third base. And you start with what's your third base strategy going. And there's still a little bit of that, right? The third base really feels like very top heavy. First base was one that I noticed I started feeling really uncomfortable with because you run into flawed players really fast at first base. Like there's really, even at that position, there's like 3 guys who I really, really like, a couple more guys I really like, but then you wait on first base and all of a sudden you're like, how does Josh Naylor ever look like the top 5 of the position? Right? Like it's weird. Some of these positions I find I have a hard time with because after you get past the top 5, you run out of guys with top 5 upside.
It does get ugly. It does get ugly at a spot. And that's one thing. Yeah. Well, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. I'd say the one that made me, again, surprised that I felt this way, it was actually shortstop.
Yeah.
Because I felt, I came in thinking, oh, with shortstop, there's tons of shortstop talent. And there is a lot of talent at shortstop, but it's not the fantasy gold mine that I thought it was going to be. No. It drops off really fast and really hard. Like Ha-Seong Kim was a really good player for us in fantasy, but like he's nowhere near the value. He was like the 8th best shortstop last season, right? By Fangraphs auction calculator. Mm-hmm. He's not close to the value of number 5.
No.
Not close.
Not at all.
The drop off is just intense and severe. You start getting to negative values at shortstop 16. Shortstop 16. Yep.
It's pretty wild at shortstops. Like you said, there are a bunch of them, and there are a bunch that you can roster. That's fine. You will roster, but the return on that investment does not feel as warm and fuzzy as it once did. So I agree with the shortstop. The other one I would say, and obviously it depends on your league format. If you have 3 outfield, 5 outfield, if you have a 5 outfield league, outfield gets murky quickly. Because it turns into, you go from like 5 category guys to 2.5 to 3 category guys real quick. Like real quick. It drops off in a hurry. And that's a position that I'd recommend if you're doing 15-team leagues. You don't have to go crazy, but by the end of the round 10, I'd have at least 3, maybe more. Like it's nasty in a 15. I'll say that much.
That's an incredibly important piece of context because in a 3 outfield league, I feel pretty good.
A 3 outfield, I wouldn't care. 3 outfield, we're good. I'd be more concerned with shortstop, 100%.
When you hit that 5 outfielder, which is often in these 15-team leagues, holy cow, does that change really fast?
Big time.
Really fast because you just start talking about really, really flawed players really quickly. right? Like you do not want to be, I don't want this to sound too mean, but like you do not want to be in a position where you're relying on Brandon Marsh.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like,
and he is going to be one of the outfielders drafted to start.
Hopefully he's your 5th if he is. Like that's what you want. You want him to be your last outfielder if so.
Yeah, because it's a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
With
you're drafting 75 outfielders. That's not including bench people. That's the point. Like it's whew.
Yeah. If you just go by last season return value and we just pretend they all came over, outfielder 75 was Michael A. Taylor. Only played 388, 388 plate appearances, right? It's not great. Like hilariously, 76 is Mike Trout, but
he only played like I'm just being
he played a bit games. Less.
I was kidding.
Yeah. But like again, you're starting to talk about players like Willie Castro, Hunter Renfroe, right? Like Randall Grichuk. If you have to be entertaining the concept of Randall Grichuk, right? Like the championship is much further than you think, right? Like,
well, you know who those players are? Those are waiver wire streamers. Those are not guys you're looking to. You're hoping you don't have them on your roster all season. Basically, that's the way I look at it.
Not a big fantasy football guy, but that's the defense you drafted because of the week 1 matchup.
Yes,
right. That was it. That was it.
And that might be a philosophy on draft day. Obviously, we're talking rankings here, but just talking out loud is as you're drafting, just plan on like at least one outfielder. It's a stream spot for you. Like you're just going to stream that position. So don't stress about it. Focus on some other holes. Like get some really solid 3 or 4 outfielders. Go get a good shortstop or whatever else, and then just go. You know what? This last outfielder, we're just going to play the streaming game here because Michael A. Taylor had great weeks. Willie Castro had great weeks. Did you want to play him every week? No. So that's where it got really interesting.
And again, we're so comfortable with this concept with pitchers, right? So comfortable with the concept of streaming pitchers, so comfortable with the concept of going to play some matchups. It works for hitters just as well.
Bingo.
You can stream, like I said this earlier, and I'll keep saying it. Yeah, you can stream every position and every stat on the hitting side if you want. Some are easier than others. It is much like you can stream stolen bases. Absolutely. There are teams that are just really bad at stopping it. And there are very obvious positions where you'll see it's going to happen. In a 12-team league, Esteury Ruiz should not be rostered all season, but there are definitely times he should be because he's going to walk into, like the White Sox who never stop anybody ever.
Yep.
Right. As long as Yasmani Grandal is allowed to put on the gear, he's not stopping anybody. So
Nobody.
If Ruiz gets that matchup, you start him every time. Or if he like somehow gets to draw like Noah Syndergaard for some reason, you start him.
100%.
You start him. Because like what's the stolen base odds? Like 50%? Like he's gonna do it.
At least. And that's why it's a discussion point I've had in recent years. Like looking every year, you look back on your successes of your teams or whatever. And streaming pitchers is getting more and more difficult just because the caliber of stream pitchers, they're not going deep into games. There's just a litany of just concerns with these guys. They're not what we used to have where hitters, you can have a week like, hey, this guy's got Coors for 4, then he's got this, or he's got Great American Small Park for 3. Like you can play that game so much more. Or, hey, this guy's going and he's facing, whatever team, like the Pirates for 3 games. Their pitching is not like there's ways to go about it where you can pinpoint things. Where a pitching situation, you look for guys with good matchups, but it could be a really bad pitcher. Or it's like there's just so many layers to it that I'm trying to tell myself more and more that it might be a streaming hitter world now than streaming pitcher, which is a big flip over recent years.
Yeah. And again, it's just so much more. It's so much more viable than I think people realize because
100%.
The strategy used to be stream pitch, focus on streaming pitching, get your hitters, plug them in. Don't worry about it anymore. And again, with more and more, I mean, like people like Nick keep telling people who the good pitchers are. Right. Like it's very 100%. Annoying. So what are we supposed to do? Well, like you can actually do the same thing for hitting. You can stream across your roster. Like some weeks there's not a good streaming pitcher to find, but there may be a good streaming outfielder, right? Who provide because all you're trying to do, the whole concept of streaming is let me grab a guy who improves something on my roster for this week or these few days, right? That's all you're trying to do. Yep. You're not limited to a position. You can stream relievers, especially in these 12-teamers.
Bingo. Like
7-game week. 4 of them are against the A's. You're getting a save in there, right? The 100%. A's are not winning 4 games. Like your only issue will be if the A's lose by 5 each time.
Exactly. You're just hoping they keep it within 3. Right. That's your biggest concern. Not the win-loss thing. It's more,
right.
Can you keep it in saves regulation?
Yeah, but like a reliever, it's funny, when we talk about relievers and poor Rick Graham has to deal with this more than I do, but it's like, oh, well, this guy hasn't gotten a save in 3 weeks. I'm like, well, there are some ebbs and flows to this naturally, but just keep an eye on the schedule. Like if you're in a saves plus holds league, you need to be streaming one of those.
100%.
Right? Yep. Absolutely. You have to, because again, you can stream every position. It's all there.
It's a great point. And the reliever thing is, again, it goes back to with these streamable options getting worse and worse for starting pitchers. And Nick's in the chat saying, just read my daily article, which is true. But like if you could stream relievers, like I say, it's a weekly league, not a daily league. Like a lot are changing too. Streaming you said a team that's got 7 games in the week and the matchups are great. Go get that 8th inning guy or something and see where things go. There's a lot to be said about that. So I'm with you there. Going back to your list here, give me a couple players that you might be higher on than others. That's what's really fun. It kind of goes back to my initial question: is we all do rankings differently, and they usually, in the end, they come out pretty similar because we're all kind of looking at the same stuff. But there will be differences. So, who are a couple hitters you might be higher on now than others?
Man, I cannot quit O'Neal Cruz. Again, massive injury risk, but. So at the end of, I'm still on this, I've never forgotten it. Towards the end of 2022, what we see with O'Neal Cruz is just this like click in his brain about decision-making, right? It just like, it starts to be like, he's like, oh, I don't have to be bad at this. And he just starts taking off. It's almost like, I don't know if a coach whispers in his ear. I don't know if like the backup catcher came and gave him a chicken parm and told him something. I don't know what happened, but O'Neal Cruz starts making these better decisions. And when he gets into 2023, we only had him for like 1 month and the overall stats don't look good, but the decision-making keeps going, right? We keep seeing it. And this is a guy who can hit line drives at like 200 miles an hour. It's amazing. If he can just be an average decision maker, we're talking about a 30-30 upside player. Yes, injuries are a big deal, but I'm still really high on it, especially in these shallower leagues. Cause like, again, I know shortstop is rough, but like, you can find a replacement, and that kind of upside is just so hard to pass up. You run out of, we talk about, a player has 20-20 upside. I can actually say that for quite a bit through the rankings. I do say it for quite a bit through the rankings.
There is a lot more than people think. 100% with you there.
Yeah. 30-30 ain't like that. 30-30 stops fast, right? Like you run out of players who have that kind of power and speed. So I'm really, really high on him. I thought the answer was going to be Royce Lewis, and then I saw how high other people were on him.
They're very high. Like some people don't care about the injuries with Royce because when he's healthy, they saw the Grand Slam barrage and they're all aboard that train.
Well, and our, spoiler alert, our PLV charts love this guy.
Well, there's not much not to like. When healthy, he legit is awesome.
Yeah, I will say one player that I am much higher on than ADP or projections, who, the ceiling isn't quite as high. Edward Julien over in Minnesota. So he is a decision-making, just like he's a god at it, right? Like as a rookie. So he actually starts out. So if you go back to his minor league times, I actually was a little bit rough on him during the season because I'm like, he got to spit on every breaking ball he saw in the minors and could walk 1,000,000% of the time, because in the minors, like most pitchers just can't challenge you with enough breaking balls as strikes to like get you out. He struggles with this just a little bit when he first gets to the majors. He's striking out too much, Julien. But then it just like, he just keeps getting better at it, keeps getting better at understanding the MLB strike zone, at understanding how pitchers can attack him, understanding how pitchers put pitches together. Right. And he also understands that like he can still do a lot of damage against major league fastballs. Right. So he just becomes pretty much the best decision maker in the league by the end of the season. Like Juan Soto was not quite this good at making decisions the way Edward Julien was at the end. Like he's like off the chart above 90th percentile, right? Like significantly above. He was adding like the 90th percent. He was actually by the end of the season adding a whole extra run per 100 pitches in terms of decision value in our metric. Like it's really hard to explain. Like the difference there is just massive, right? Because like one run, if you're only adding 1 run per 100 pitches, you're in the bottom 25th percentile. If you're adding 2 runs per 100 pitches, you're above the 90th percentile. He was almost a 3. Like
pretty darn good.
Unbelievable how good he was at this. And he has power against fastballs. I think he can force because he's so good at understanding that strike zone, at understanding when to swing, when not to swing. He's going to make pitchers throw him fastballs for strikes. And the moment they do, I think he can punish them. I think this is a guy who can hit, 20 home runs, 90 something runs scored. I rank him 115 in the hitters. So it's weird that I'm this excited about him, you'd think, but like he's an afterthought for a lot of folks. They're not sure if he's going to play enough. This guy is too good for the Twins.
205 ADP.
Yeah. But he can be so much better than this. Like my 115 ranking is like, I already hate it, right? I'm already looking and be like, why did I put Lord Scurriel above that? Right. Like, why did I put these guys? Like, no, right. Like he should be higher. Now I understand, like, he's not going to give you speed, but this dude can score a bunch of runs. This guy can be just, in OBP and points leagues, he should be way, way, way on your radar. This guy is unbelievable at making the right decision. And it's hard. Another guy I'm very high on because I just believe in the changes he made. A little bit more boring. JP Crawford.
Yeah.
JP Crawford hit 19 home runs. That's actually more than he had in the 3 prior seasons combined. He hit more home runs than he had in his previous 358 games. And like this, he went to Driveline, right? He went to Jared. He went to Driveline. And he actually he helped him walk more, which helped a lot. He was able to score 94 runs last season. He's going to continue to be at the top of the Mariners lineup. Mariners lineup is a little top heavy, but he still gets to hit directly in front of Julio Rodriguez, who's pretty good. He's someone who, again, he may take a bit step back in a little bit of the step back in the power, but like we were talking about with shortstop, like it gets ugly really, really fast.
Yeah. 100%.
And JP Crawford, especially if you're in a league that requires like a middle infielder, you're going to love being able to just plug this guy in there. He's going to score runs. Runs are a difficult thing to find, especially later on in drafts, because the players that score the most runs are the ones at the top of the lineup. The guys who are at the top of the lineup tend to be very, very good. So you don't find a ton of players like JP Crawford who are maybe like a little bit of an afterthought for fantasy, but also bat first consistently.
He's fallen in drafts still. Like it's a lot of people aren't believing, but I'm with you. Look at the adjustments he's made, and will he be maybe he's more of a 13 home run guy? Still great for what he's doing. Scores a ton of runs. Could be a 19 to 20 home run guy still. There's still that in the bag. So I'm with you. Where he's going in drafts surprises me every time I see him there. And I usually end up scooping him up for some backup support at the shortstop position in a big way.
Yeah. Last one I'll say, a guy who I've just been very high on ever since he got traded from Detroit for a player that actually just got released by Detroit, Isaac Paredes in Tampa Bay.
Yep.
So I love Isaac Paredes' hit tool, which sounds weird because his batting average is consistently below average or much worse, right? But this is actually, Isaac Paredes had a really, really good hit tool. Is his best. It's the tool that carried him in the minor leagues. And when he goes to Tampa basically finds Isaac Paredes and says, hey, we think you're really, really good at hitting the ball. You're really good at putting the ball where you want to put it. So you're now going to put it over there to the pool field every time. Yep. Right? Please do that every time. Take that good hit tool and turn it into a very, very specific skill. And he did it. So one thing that Pitcher List does in their expected stats that StatCast, or I don't want to say StatCast, what Baseball Savant does not, is talk about batted ball direction. And there's a very good reason that Baseball Savant doesn't do that. Tano Tigers explained it a few times, but what he does is says basically, for the most part, league batted ball direction is noisy and random, right?
Yep.
But that's for the league as a whole. And it's true. For specific players, it is not noisy. It is not random. A really, really good tool you can use during the season is if you see a player who you think has really made a change to say, I am intentionally pulling the ball more. Go and look at the difference between our pitcher list. We get the same StatCast data Savant does. We say, look at his expected stats at pitcher list versus regular Baseball Savant, the one that everyone's going to with the much, much improved sliders now. But, look at that. So Isaac Paredes, when you look at the Baseball Savant one, looks like the luckiest hitter on this planet, right? Because they don't think he should have any power. His batting average should be even worse than it is. And Pitcher List buys it much, much more. And it's because of the batted ball direction, because we know that a ball hit in the air 360 feet to the pull field is probably a home run. And to the center is definitely an out, right? Every time, 100% of the time, it's an out to dead center. A 375-foot hit to the pull field is pretty much a home run 100% of the time. Again, to center field, always an out. If the player is consistently pulling the ball, right, go look at those expected stats. And I do that a lot because I think Isaac Paredes and the Rays have really figured out how to get Isaac Paredes to do this very specific thing, which is pull fly balls. He's actually in a park which is bad generally for home runs, but it's actually just fine to the pull field. In Tampa, it's not a deep park to that part of the field. It's not a very high wall. It's not quite the Crawford boxes, but it's actually much closer than you think. Like they have in Houston. He's going to keep doing that. I am all in on Isaac Paredes hitting another 27 to 30 home runs. I'm all in on another 90 RBI season as a guy who's going to continue to play every day. And for a Rays team that will just keep finding ways to score runs. So big Isaac Paredes fan. Don't let the regular expected stats fool you. They are ignoring the fact that he is now one of the most extreme pull hitters in the league.
Yeah. And for someone, like you said earlier, your power is a concern in drafts. Well, there you go. Isaac's a guy late in the draft that can help you in that department in a big way. Who are some of the players you are lower on than others?
Oh, these are always less fun. Right?
Yes, much less fun. I'm with you.
I want to say the first one is I haven't actually like checked to see how other people are ranking him. I'm just a little bit lower on Marcell Ozuna. Again, this is kind of out of nowhere, career high in home runs and RBI, raises batting average over 50 points over the previous 2 seasons. And it's not easy to explain how that happens using pure stats, right? This is a guy with the previous injury risk. There is upside that he could do what he did again last season, this season. But whenever I see a player who like the reason, I'm big on narrative. That's why I talked about all these rolling charts. And when I can't find one, I'm very uncomfortable, right? If I just can't figure out why this happened, I don't see a major change in, the batted ball stuff. I don't see a major change in approach. I don't see this stuff. I'm like, why is this happening? I don't understand it. And when I don't understand it, I don't trust it quite as much. It's actually the same reason I'm not quite as high on Cody Bellinger as other people, right? Like it was very difficult for me to really identify like what made him so much better this season than in the 2 seasons prior. And there's not a lot of obvious answers, right? Like you'd think that there was like some clear change in his quality of contact. There's really not, right? Like he does have a career best strikeout rate. But like it actually came with a career worst barrel rate, right? Worst hard hit rate. There's a below average exit velocity. It's so strange that he has this huge turnaround and his quality of contact was worse, right? Like that's hard for me to understand. I'm not saying you can't do it again, right? I rank him number 40. He's my 40th hitter, and I'm so uncomfortable with it because that's a hard path to success.
When we kind of talked about it earlier in the show, like there's some guys you just have to rank lower than others or whatever, even though you don't like the guy, you don't feel comfortable with the guy, you still got to rank him somewhere because that's kind of the ballpark they're going in. And that's
the ceiling is there. I just saw it, right? Like he did it with these career worst things. And so if he improves those, he could put up even better stats. I get that. It's just, man, it's so hard. Like what am I attaching it to? I can't just hope a guy's going to fix something, right? Or just that it's going to happen again.
Does make it tricky. Any other guys you might be lower on? You don't have to be all negative if you want. We can call it a Marcell, or you can go.
I'm not nearly as high on Vlad Guerrero as Steamer is.
Oh, I'll tell you that. I want nothing to do with Vlad. His, people will like him more than me in drafts. Let's put it that way.
Now, on one hand, he's the opposite of Bellinger. He was actually like just fine quality of contact wise. Like it was not really worse than previous seasons. The stats are just lower. Right. And it's, it was very disappointing based on the expectations. We're getting the issue just for me is like, we're getting further and further away from that 2021 breakout, right? He has that 2021 breakout. We just keep getting further from it without seeing like a return to that level of success. How many more times does that need to happen before we just accept like maybe Vlad just like is a little bit less than that? Right? Like not a bad player. I rank him 24th. He's a good hitter. It's a really, really high floor. But if the ceiling isn't as high as we thought it was 1 or 2 years ago, at that point, like the top 3 tiers right now, and the way I have that, actually Vlad's the last player in those top 3 tiers. Number 24, like that is a really, really dense population of players. Like the first couple rounds of hitting is really, really deep. So it's, if you like it, I almost didn't have him in that tier because I'm like, do I really believe Vlad Guerrero will have a better season than some of these guys? Right. Like, how does Vlad Guerrero really approach the kind of season that Corey Seager had? Right. I'm not sure I see it anymore. That's the problem there. The last guy I'll mention, Trey Turner. It is insane how much of that production comes in a single stretch of 34 games. 34 games. Trey Turner was a good fantasy producer. For the remaining 100 something games, he was not. He was a below average player. So if you're in like a head-to-head Cats league, like weekly, he was actually a huge drag for you, except for those few weeks
in the playoffs, probably.
Yeah, he wasn't good at the end of the season either. Last couple weeks,
that's true. It was more like August.
It was August 5th. I looked at it. It was August 5th to September 12th.
Yeah,
right. He hits 385 in that stretch. He slugged 830. 40% of his counting stats and extra base hits come in a 34 game stretch.
Yeah.
40% of his production in that one chunk.
There's a contrarian conversation. Maybe he finally got comfortable in Philadelphia with the new deal, but then, like you said, he finished pretty poor. Playoffs were okay though. So it's interesting. I'm with you. I'm concerned. I'm just started a gladiator draft right before the show here. And I had the 9th pick and Turner was on the board and I took Spencer Strider instead, like, cause Turner just scared me. And previous 2 or 3 seasons, Turner was like one of my top 1 or 2 picks guaranteed. And I'm scared at number 9 to take him.
I rank him as my 16th hitter, Trey Turner. And again, we're talking about 108 games of the season, the beginning and at the end. He hit 236, 289, 367 with 10 home runs and 95 combined runs and RBI.
Yeah,
that was in and then at the end, he was even worse, right? Like he was just not good for so long. That terrifies me.
Yeah, I have him as my second shortstop. I haven't done I just a dumb position so far. He's the 9th hitter off the board in the NFBC. But if you look at him, he's gone where is he at? As high as 2nd, as low as 17th. Your 16th, I don't mind. Like, obviously, you're going to factor pitchers in there too. But I kind of like that turn on a 15 team potentially. Like I can understand that. Let's put it that way. So yeah,
I ranked him right behind Corey Seager, actually. So
I do like Corey a lot. So that's fair.
I do too. And I just, I'm lower on it. But again, I obviously understand the ceiling. The number of players that are capable of doing what he did for 34 games is like not many, right?
Not many. Like, there's Ronald Acuna and maybe somebody else.
It's, again, I talked about Bubba Chet in 2022 actually has like a crazy stretch like this. And it's important to note that superstar, like, a player's a superstar because they can do something like that. Like at any given time, they can have an amazing month at any given time, not one time like a Paul DeYoung. I mean, any given time they could do it. Mm-hmm. So I respect that, but also terrified.
Yeah, terrified for sure. Especially in an early pick. You don't want to be terrified in your early picks. Those are the ones you really want to trust in your early picks. So let's talk about a few players that you broke down. We've already talked pretty good amount about Elly De La Cruz. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on him? I think you're very optimistic on some more improvements from him, it sounds like.
Yeah, I really am. I respect the floor. 15-team leagues, you got to care about that a little more. But again, few players have this kind of ceiling.
Yep. And then O'Neal Cruz, we know you love him. You mentioned him a second ago, so we're good there. Now let's have some fun. And I laughed at, I made this list and I'm like, wait, it's all young players. No wonder. These are the biggest question marks in the world here. So let's get to him. CJ Abrams. This is a guy that I love because I laugh. My gladiator drafts are, people think they're crazy, and they are. You only draft 23. There's no bench. But to me, it was looking back and going, okay, you drafted these in December. These are guys that you were already going in on, and you had some trust in it. And I had CJ Abrams everywhere in gladiator drafts. I liked his upside. Did I think he'd be this guy? No. But he had 18 homers, 47 steals, finally got to play every day, which I love. He's super young. He's going to be 23 this year, like really, really young. What do you have in your rankings when you look at CJ Abrams? Are you optimistic on similar results, better results? Are you concerned? What are you seeing with CJ?
Yeah. So, first, I hope people don't get mad at me. He's my 47th overall hitter, but that's because these rankings are for 12-team head-to-head categories where steals matter a lot less. This is a guy with 90th percentile contact. CJ Abrams can put his bat on the ball. He won't hit it very hard, but he will hit it, right? I think the biggest thing with CJ Abrams was, if you recall, he actually only had 9 stolen bases by the end of June.
Yeah, it was a second half barrage.
It, like, out of nowhere, they just decided that, oh yeah, he is fast. He stole 16 bases in July after getting the leadoff role. He had been hitting a little better. They put him in the leadoff role. He stole like 50% more bases than he had the entire season prior to July in July, right? And they don't play for a week in July, right? Like, he stole 13 bases, 16 bases in July, 13 more in August, 9 more in September. So you have like I'm a big fan. I think that he can just, his ratios are not going to be that great because he pops out quite a bit. Again, that crazy contact ability comes with him also being very, very aggressive. He tries to put a lot of balls in play because, again, when you're that fast, you're like, this ball doesn't need to go very far for me to get to first base, right? Like, I don't need a lot of time, says CJ Abrams, to get to first base. Yeah. But it also means that the ratios overall are going to stink because he'll hit a lot of balls that are just really hard to do anything to. Slugging will always be bad. The OBP is not going to be great because he ain't trying to walk. He's a runner, right? Like, why walk, right, when I can run faster? 100%. So you got to, but again, he's really, really good at making contact. That means the floor is, I think, still very high. As long as Washington is just going to keep letting him run like he did in the second half, this is a player who I think could find a way to 20 home runs and 50 stolen bases. It's a crazy ceiling.
He could be a Corbin Carroll duplicate. That's what's interesting. Maybe not as good of an average, but that 20 homer, 50 steals.
Pull the ratios and like some of the counting stats off.
Yeah,
but like
Nationals
the power speed.
D-backs, yeah, for sure. So that's one of those. I only like to make those comparisons because obviously, like, you hit on the few things where they differ. But if it's one of those things and you're trying to build your team, like I always say, said it already, have a game plan. When you're going to your draft, have a game plan. And it's like, okay, if I like Corbin Carroll, but I can't get him, but I liked him obviously because there's some pop and some speed. Well, maybe make a point to get a CJ Abrams to kind of cover that bit. I don't know. There's just ways to go about it to think about when you're piecing it all together. This next one's going to be very entertaining to me because I am a big Nolan Jones fan, but I will be 100% clear on this one. ADP-wise is very challenging for me. 2020 last year on 106 games. That's great. You have him as your 59th hitter. So I am very interested in what you see in Nolan Jones that makes you push him much farther down compared to most people out there.
I want to understand why most people out there are so high.
I think they're seeing the combo. That's all it is. I think it's strictly all it is.
And again, he was he was excellent. So September specifically, right? I mean, that's the part. If you just look at like the month by month stats, you pull up September, you see that 16.4% walk rate, 21.1% strikeout rate, amazing ratios. The strikeout rate, I'm almost like reading my piece in the article. Basically, the strikeout rate, what stand out for a month, he had it down to 21.1%. We'll also remember that they actually played in Colorado quite a bit at the end of the season, right? So that might have had an impact. And I see a path for him to like 25 home runs, 20 stolen bases with ratios that are good, but variable, right? Like they're going to come up and down. Just because he's going to have stretches where they spend, a week and a half on a road trip and then he's going to be back home. It's very hard to be consistent as a Rockies player. Nolan Jones, again, he's got a ton of power. Keep in mind a little bit that Coors does a lot of things for power, but it kind of it doesn't just give you more home runs. It actually takes some of your home runs. Yeah, it takes it away, turns it into doubles, right? Instead of outs, because the outfield is just massive, right? So strikeouts are still a problem, right? He needs to take a step forward in decision-making against breaking balls, which is something that a lot of players have to do. It's really, really difficult. Now, if he does it, I think we can see more months like he had in September. Right. But I think that is going to be something that's incredibly variable. There's quite a bit of risk there. Because again, it's not as though like just because he did it at the end doesn't mean that's where his new starting point is. Right. True. It means he's capable of this, but most of the time he was not this. Mm-hmm. Right. He actually struck out much, much more than that. And that could be something like throughout a whole season could be more difficult. I'm lower just because like, I have guys like, at first base, Christian Encarnacion Strand above him because I think the ceiling there is higher. He has elite power. I think he is someone who's definitely got a path to like 35 home runs. Christian Encarnacion Strand. He won't come with stolen bases, but that's there. It's really the floor with Nolan Jones, I think, could be very, very low. This was a guy that, I mean, it's not like he's been a Colorado prospect forever, and we've just been waiting for him to come up. He's had contact issues before. Colorado does not make contact easier. It makes contact easier in Coors, and it makes it harder everywhere else. I have a lot of concerns about what that looks like over the course of a whole season.
All valid points. And that's why it's just a fun one. Like, he got traded a year or two ago from the Cleveland system to Colorado, still had trouble getting playing time in Colorado, finally got the playing time. I guess the reason why I'm kind of optimistic is he's only going to be 26, so he's still young. But there are other concerns. Like, I've always been a Ryan McMahon fan, and in the end, he's always like 23 home runs. He hits like 250. Like, you look at the stats, it's like he finishes that every single year, and you look at the underlying stats, you think there's more, and there's just not. So that's why Nolan Jones is a tough one. Another one that's, you look at draft day, you look at the ADPs, and it's a very tricky one to come up with. And you mentioned there's other guys, like the next one I'm going to compare to. You had Jones at 59, you had Vinnie P at 61, and Triston Casas at 62. And these are two fun names. Triston Casas, monster into the season, second half, maybe part of the second half, really good stuff. Vinnie P missed a lot of the season injured. So my kind of question, I put them together like a versus. You have Vinnie P one spot ahead of Triston Casas, which at that point it's like you're probably just grasping at straws. But how do you, how do you? I guess everyone's so high on Triston Casas, Vinnie P coming off the injury. How do you have these guys right next to each other? What's your thought process here?
I can't talk about those two without talking to the guy right above them, which is Spencer Torkelson. These
so, three. Yeah, it's like your first base tier. It's like boom, 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 boom.
I really wanted to break these guys apart to make it seem like I wasn't just bunching them all together and throwing them at the end of the tier. But I kind of just bunched them all together and threw them at the end of this tier because they all kind of present some different things. So Torkelson actually gets to the 31 home runs. 27 of them come on or after June 4th. Right. Wow. So he actually had from June 4th on, he had a 41 home run pace, Spencer Torkelson.
It's pretty good.
So, I mean, he's got, elite power. I think he actually has the most power of this group. He's the one I think who could very well get to, if you told me one of them hit 40 home runs, I know it's absolutely not Vinnie P. It's probably not Casas. It probably is Torkelson. But yeah, so, and I'm a Tigers guy. I love Spencer Torkelson. This is one of the best college hitters of the last decade. I think, he's really fun. So Vinnie P, right? What Vinnie P represents is this high floor, sort of moderate ceiling first baseman. Vinnie P ain't hitting 30 home runs, right? So he did hit 28 home runs across the AAA and majors in 2022, his full healthy season. A lot of that damage does come in the minor leagues. I think he's more, especially now that I'll have to play all those games, like, half of them at least in Kaufman, which is a very difficult place to hit home runs. I think Vinnie P's like a 22 to 25 home run guy. I think the batting average is going to be much, much better than Casas, obviously, just because Casas's approach is very, very typical lefty slugger, like, walk, strikeout, home run kind of thing, where Vinnie P is the more contact oriented, right? It's not that he doesn't have power. I think he can hit 22, 25 home runs, but he's very much like putting the ball in play a lot more. He's not trying to walk 1,000,000% of the time. I'm a huge fan of Vinnie P, especially like personally, like on Twitter. I think he's hilarious, but he's a high floor guy. So in a lot of situations, like, you might actually put Vinnie P over both of the other first basemen. You might put him over Tork and Casas based on how your draft is gone. You need that high floor player. Yep. But if what you're searching for is ceiling, I start with Tork. If Tork's gone, I think you got to go Casas because he's the one. I mean, he's got 30, 35 home run power. I think the ratios are he actually second half hit 317. I'd be surprised if he continued to hit with that kind of batting average. That only happens if he keeps that strikeout rate down, which again, he did in the second half. 23.7%. That's something he can do, right? I think 30 home runs, 90 RBI, that's all there. He's extremely passive though, and he's really struggled against lefties, right? So I don't think the Red Sox want to platoon him again like they did so much last season, but you have to keep in mind that some of these positive numbers, like some of this improvement, sort of like he did start seeing more lefties as the season went on, but they did protect him from left-handed pitching in a way that they're not hopefully going to do in 2024, which I say hopefully because I do think Casas can get over this problem. But to do so might have a little bit of growing pains. And again, you can shuffle these 3 first basemen, Casas, Vinnie P, Torque, all around if you want. Casas I have at the bottom just because I felt like there were a few more potential weaknesses in his game that could turn into something. All 3 of them I think are going to be really good. 2024. Casas is the one that had this, he's extremely passive, which I don't always like. I like that it's like for walk rates. But I don't always like it because like when you got that kind of power, you got to swing the bat sometimes.
100%. That's the
and so he is a really, really good decision maker. A lot of that comes from not swinging. Pitchers don't give him a lot of stuff to swing at all the time. But yeah, he's the lowest, but again, splitting hairs between these guys. He might be it's weird to say that I think Torque has the most power, but Casas might be like the safest bet to get to like 30.
Exactly.
Just because just what the way he plays and his approach, there's no path to where Casas is like, oh, I'm going to start hitting more doubles now.
No. Yeah. He's
right. I'm going to find that power alley in Fenway. There's not one. Right. I guess knocking it off the Green Monster, but like that's the only power alley. Whereas Torque's got Comerica, can be difficult to hit home runs there, especially if you're hitting it towards the center of the field, like he did early in the year. Vinnie P just doesn't have that power, especially in Kaufman. So, yeah, he's the one that might be the safest bet to get to 30 home runs. He's also the one that's most likely to hit like 210.
Yeah, and I'm with you. That was why I like this like grouping you had here, and you threw Torque in, which is great. I'm a huge Torque fan, so I'm with you. But I'm concerned. Like, I believe I'm with you. I think he's a 40+ home run guy, but in that ballpark, there's always a chance where it just goes, it just disappears for a bit, which is terrifying. So that's why I like the Vinnie P. I think is a great pure hitter. Like we're on the same page in all this, but I like how you said it there. It's look at how your draft's going, and then you can pinpoint what you need. Do you need excess power? Do you need more stable average with a little bit of power? Do you want to kind of go for this guy? It's got a little bit of everything. Like, what are you looking for here on your team? And that's pretty sweet stuff. Last guy I have here is Jackson Chourio. And this is a guy that comes up in every show I do, no matter if it's Vince with Bubba or whatever, because he's the conundrum. You have him as your 100th hitter off the board. Since he got called up, or didn't get called up yet, he got the contract, which will get him likely called up. He's the 120th player off the board in NFBC 15-team draft champions. He's gone as high as 124 ADP, which is probably like the 70th hitter overall. So he is moving up boards quickly. What did you see when you ranked him at 100? Because I have a tough time ranking him and I have no clue what's going on with him.
Yeah. So obviously like tons of power and speed, right? Like there's a reason that he's like one of the top 3 prospects in the game, right? Like there's a couple guys that can sort of be in that range, but he's kind of always up there. Took some big steps forward. He didn't strike out nearly as much this season as he had in some of his lower levels. So that was good. I'm worried about the ground ball rate, man. Like he hits the ball on the ground a ton, right? And you can put up a lot of home runs in the minor leagues and also have a high ground ball rate. The player it reminded me of, this is not a comp. This is a issue comp, is Jordan Walker. So Jordan Walker's got a ton of power. He had a ton of ground balls, and it took some adjustment there because when he got to the major leagues, he just hit more ground balls, right? And doesn't matter how hard you hit it, right? You hit it into dirt, you just kill worms. It doesn't do anything. You can't hit a ground rule double off the infield dirt. Doesn't work that way. So that's my concern. That's why I pull him down a bit. I obviously understand why people are moving him way up. I also wonder though, how do you project beyond 20 to 22 home runs in 2022, 20 to 22 stolen bases? Like I understand conceptually how you do it, but when it actually comes time to put your money where your mouth is, that's a bold move. I'm not ready to do that yet. Maybe spring training changes that. I don't know. But, especially with that ground ball issue that he's got, again, Miller Park's a nice place to hit for power, but ground ball issues will make that tough no matter where you play.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I just looked. I had him at my 48th outfielder, and I didn't love it. I'll be honest, but I have him right next to Christopher Morel, so they both have warts. Depends on how you want to look at it. It's just tough. The talent's great, we know that, but he's jumping basically from Double-A to the bigs. There's just a whole litany of question marks I have, but you never know. We've seen guys do it. We've seen guys also struggle at times as well. So I'm very curious to see how that goes. I'm curious to see how his rankings and ADP continues to change this draft season. All right there, Mr. Scott Chu. Anything else you'd like to talk about here before we wrap things up? We covered the gamut tonight. That was a lot of fun going through all kinds of good stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, I was surprised that in my rankings, I ended up having Chourio a little bit above, and this might be sacrilege. I actually have him a little bit above Evan Carter.
Okay.
And the reason is because I wonder, I'm like, I think Jackson Chourio can get to 20 home runs. I think Evan Carter has a hard time getting to 20 home runs.
I think Evan Carter has a hard time getting regular playing time.
Yeah. Yeah. Among other things. Right. So,
Mhm.
he was amazing at the end of the season, but like that doesn't necessarily change the type of player that I think Evan Carter is. Like a good month is awesome, but it doesn't necessarily change who you are. And Evan Carter is a guy who I was worried about the amount of power he had when he got to the majors. I'm still a little bit worried about it. I think he can get to 20 stolen bases if given the opportunity, but where is he hitting in the lineup? Even when he's in the lineup, that's great. Where does he hit in the lineup? Is it at the bottom? What does that look like? So, I'm excited about what he brings to the table, but let's keep in mind, like Evan Carter only has 48 games above AA.
Exactly.
Like it's not this huge track record. It's just like, it's a very public track record, but it's not a long one. So he was a player that I was worried about. And I think the other thing that really stood out to me as I did all this, the players that I had to move around a lot were the ones where I kept moving them because I'm like, he's boring and I don't know where to put him. And like weirdly hard for me to rank was Brandon Drury.
Yeah,
Brandon
I can
Drury
see
had a
that.
good season last year.
Really good season again.
Yeah, for no reason. He only nobody thought he was going to hit a bunch of home runs again. Like, oh, the power will come down, but he could be okay. He had 26 home runs in 125 games, right? Like it wasn't quite the 28 he hit the year before that, but sure was almost, right? Like,
Yep.
is that what Brandon Drury is? Playing for an LA team that's got like nothing left? Like, what does that team look like when Trout's hurt inevitably?
Yeah.
Right? Like, ugh. And he's someone that gets hurt a lot too. Man, I encourage everyone to you don't have to rank 200 players and write a paragraph about all of them like I did. In fact, I almost encourage you not to because it's rough on your sanity, right? Like I encourage you not to, even though I know you're going to do it. But try to do it just a little bit because all I want is for people, it's very easy for people to like go to the comment section and say, oh, I hate this list. I get it every week. I write a hitter list every week, 150 guys. Someone always says they hate it. And I'm like, that's fine. You can hate it. I hate it sometimes, right? I get done with that. I'm like, oh, this is trash. I mean, it's what I believe, but also like I'm an idiot.
Yep.
So like that happens. But keep in mind that like this exercise is very, very difficult. And doing it, like the end result you get from it is sort of the list that you create. But a lot of it is the friends you make along the way, as in what you learn about these players and what you learn about
100%.
what you learn a lot about what you look for in players by just going through and trying to rank them.
Yep.
Right. Because you're going to come up with tough decisions, right? Like pre-injury for me, it was Ronnie Mauricio or Brandon Drury. Who do I like as my second baseman?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a fair comment. No.
And who do you like? Like I had to make the decision of who do I like more. I'll tell you that, projections and I think the NFBC probably like Trevor Story a lot more than Brandon Drury. And my question is why?
It's a great question.
Why? Because Brandon Drury is I feel like he's a lot more likely to hit 25 home runs. He's a lot more likely to play in 125 games. He's a lot more likely to get counting stats because Trevor Story doesn't play. And when he does, he's extremely erratic. So why? Why is the ADP so high? Right? Like I get it. Like it's not like I don't see skills there, but he keeps striking out a ton. Right. I do think he could hit 20 home runs, steal 20, 25 stolen bases, but like there's so many blockers to that path.
Yep.
Like it's not playing time as in he's got a job, but he's never healthy enough to have it. Right. So
that's
like
the thing. Yeah.
Really, I mean, I think if I just like threw out on Reddit Drury or Story, I think everybody tells me Story.
You'd get blasted if you picked Drury on Reddit. You know how the Reddit streets work.
Yeah. But and like, I do a Reddit AMA and I love it, even though, I get burned sometimes. It's fine. I don't mind that. Just before you just like instantly go into like, my brain says instant reaction, it's gotta be Story. The whole process of doing these rankings forces you to really explain to yourself why. Why am I doing this? Not because an ADP is not a stat, right?
Yep.
Like
100%.
nobody wins and nobody won a league because they got the most value on draft day. That might be true, but the reason they won is they got the most stats.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about value on draft day at the end of the day. It's about how many stats you actually get.
Yep.
So, if presented with the option in the same exact round, Brandon Drury or Trevor Story, I think a lot of things would tell you there's a lot more. You're getting a much better value from Trevor Story based on his ADP and all that, but you don't win leagues that way. You win leagues picking the right answer. And it might be Trevor Story, but it has nothing to do with the fact that his ADP is earlier. It has everything to do with the fact that you think he will be a better player or that he is a better fit for your fantasy roster. Going through and doing rankings helps you make that decision and helps prepare you for that draft. Cause you're like, look, 100%. I've actually thought about this before. I've thought about these two guys and what it looks like. Right. So I'm ready to make that call. I came up with the scenarios of when it's Drury and when it's Story, or, even like towards the top of the draft, it's the same thing, right? Like you have to know where are you willing to draft a Story Ruiz? I'm not. That means to me, I have to get my stolen bases another way. I am not willing to use that quote unquote lifeline later in the draft. I'm not willing to do it because I don't think he's a very good hitter, right? He's better than me, but I wouldn't draft me either, right? Like Ruiz is not like, I just think he's too much of a black hole in every other stat. I don't want to get my stolen bases that way. I have to do it another way. So it informs my draft strategy. And it also helps me answer questions where it's like, there's going to be a draft, right? I start feeling like this is a good idea where it's like, oh, maybe I will take it. He keeps slipping. Doing this process. Like I ranked him, but like effectively he's off my board. I ranked him because I think he's important to talk about. And in a vacuum, this is probably around where he should be ranked. I'm never doing it because as I did the rest, I was like, I know how I want to get my steals and it's not this way.
Yeah, and that goes back to a point I made earlier. Like I'm ranking these guys here. I might be lower on them than others, but that's because I'm not going to draft them. That's kind of like my hint. That's my hint to people. If it's much lower than others, it's because I ain't going to draft them. Like I don't want them, but it's here because somebody else will. Like here you go. This is where you should probably go in this rough area. But also to your comment about doing the rankings, I've said it forever. Like if and it's not everybody's got the time to do it. Not many people want to do it. If you can ever put your own rankings together, you're ahead of the game come draft day because you've done the work. Like that's the way to do the work. Now, if you want to read mine, Scott's, anybody's, all the above, cool, go for it. And what I suggest is if you don't want to do like a top 200, do like a top 20 in each position. Just the fact that you had to research 20 guys at each position, because then you'll have an idea of like when the draft's going on, when positions get scarce, when statistics get scarce. You kind of at least know. And by the time you do 20 at each position, and obviously outfield you go deeper and everything, you'll do over 200 in the end. So you'll have a good idea of the player pool and what you want to do, and it just gets you prepped. I know it's not everybody's got the time to do it. That's why we do it. You guys read our stuff, which we appreciate. But if you can do it, it's just a gigantic difference for you.
Even if you don't bring it to the draft table.
Yep. No, it's just the whole prep. It's just the process.
It is a great way to perform the exercise. There's other ways to do it. You can go through my article and you can just like rage write down 20 names that you think I'm absolutely wrong on, and then go tell me why.
Prove it.
That is actually, and honestly, I hope you do, right? Because one, you're probably going to figure out something that I missed, but also because like now you have the answer to your question. Like, why don't I want that guy in that spot? Like, those are the questions you really don't want to answer in the, like when the clock is on.
100%.
Right? Like you're not trying to answer a lot of questions when the clock is on. You don't have time.
No.
So answer as many as you can beforehand. There's so many ways to do it. Do your own rankings or go and just like crap on mine. That's fine. Get the work done. And like, it'll, and on the plus side, I'll get a click from you. I don't earn anything directly from the click, but you'll have done it and I'll feel happy about it and I'll have my comeuppance. It'll be fine. But like, do those kinds of things, that exercise, that's what's very useful. Have those questions answered, but also, at the same time, be willing to like hear someone tell you that like, oh, I like this player more, right? Like I had feelings about guys. I read someone else and I was like, I don't agree with that, but I am forced to accept that this is a reality and that you could very well be right. I don't think you will be, but you could be because you made a point and it's not wrong or stupid.
Yeah, and I'm always open to a conversation if we can be cool about it. Like, don't just tell me like I'm a complete moron, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I get told that a lot. Cool. But if you want to like, hey, I found such and such stat that kind of points this direction. Can we talk about it? Cool, let's do it. Like, teach me something. I'm in. Because there's so many ways. Like we talked about PLV, we talked about decision value, we talked about that today. There's other tools on other sites that people use. Like there's so many ways to analyze players these days, that if you can find a kind of, diamond in the rough or something that goes piques an interest that maybe it shows something we didn't notice. Cool. Bring it. Let's do it. That's the beauty of it. And then in the end, you got to hope these guys can, play baseball for 150 plus games and do that thing too.
Nolan Jones is never moving into my top 40 hitters, but I could absolutely see someone. I can absolutely visualize an argument that someone makes that I'm like, I get that. If you believe that's true, he should be in your top 40 hitters, and you're not crazy and you're not stupid. Like, that's a real thing. And it's valuable to like know those things, right? Like, me saying why I have Nolan Jones so low, that doesn't mean I think you should. I'm just telling you that like we all can see like the different variables. This is how my brain did the calculus and spit it out. And it's the low end. And I get that. But I also understand it's because these are things I'm worried about. I don't like players who have to make these kinds of like, we have to make the kind of adjustments he has to make. And I especially don't like it when you have to improve your decision-making value against the type of pitch that moves so much differently every other week for Colorado hitters, right? 100%. When breaking balls are your problem and you're a Colorado Rockies hitter, it means breaking balls are just gonna be an extra problem because you don't just have to figure out how the slider moves. It's how the slider moves this week. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not in Coors this week, or I am in Coors this week, right? Like, that's a very difficult thing to do. It changes your visual. Like, there used to be this stat called visual memory index that was really interesting. That said, basically, your brain thinks that's going to move 2 inches and it actually moves 1.25 inches. That's a pop out now.
That's a massive difference in hitting the barrel of a bat in a big way.
It's huge. You're talking about a round bat and a round ball.
Hardest thing to do. Hardest thing to do is 2 round objects creating the contact you need. Yes.
Yeah. So, not to belabor the point, but like, those are the things that like I'm valuing. And you can basically I think you do a great job of that. I agree with everything you say. I don't agree with the end, but I agreed with everything you said before that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's still a very good exercise.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's the fun of it all. And that's why it's a fun thing we get to do, this trying to be fantasy analysts and predict the future. It's a great game we play, but we will wrap it up there. It's been a fun discussion. I always enjoy talking to you. It's a great time. Once again, remind everybody where they can find you. What you're taking your breather, taking a little sabbatical after 22,000 words, but what do you got coming up for in Pitcher List? What's down the pipe for you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at @IfTheChewFits. My work is all over at pitcherlist.com. I'm taking a little bit of a breather now. Really, the next big thing will be doing it all again. Not as a top 200 straight, but it'll actually be positional rankings broken down. And I'll do separate ones for each position. I'll also have, my top 200. It just won't be a breakdown of every single player that way. It'll be more of a straight up list. But that'll be the next thing. Cause amazingly between now and February, things will change because I will hear different opinions. I will see different things. Guys will get hurt. Guys will find paths to playing time, sign contracts. They'll do stuff. So that'll probably be the next big thing I do. Other than just posting a bunch of rolling charts. I've now have like weeks to just find fun rolling charts and put them out there. And if you find a fun one, please send it to me at @IfTheChewFits or just tag me or whatever it is you're going to do. I love these things. Even if you're just like, Scott, I see this and it makes no sense to me. Like, I might come back and just tell you like, yeah, that's some random variation right there. Or I might dig a little deeper and be like, oh, so that's random, but look at this against fastballs, or look at this the contact ability changed. That's why he got more aggressive, because he felt more comfortable hitting stuff. We can do that kind of stuff. It's fun. I could literally talk about rolling charts all day.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. That's why I enjoyed that. I wanted to talk to you about it and all the other good stuff that comes with it. So you all better follow him if you're not already. He's on Twitter at @IfTheChewFits, Chew Fits. That is Scott Chew, everybody, at pitcherlist.com. Thanks for joining me, my friend. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
Glad to be here and glad to go to bed soon.
All right, everybody. This is Bench with Bubba, episode 616. Catch you all next time.